just while Ken's fixing the screen, we might make a start. So welcome everyone to, thank you, to day 11 of the Viva Supplementary EES hearings. We just have one preliminary matter to raise this morning, and this is one for the proponent. Regarding document 99, so that was Dr. Wallace's response to the questions on notice. We want to thank Dr. Wallace for that. But the 25th, 50th and 75th percentiles of suspended solids, we've got the numbers for those, but not the plots. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Briscoe, who can explain in a lot more detail. I think there might have been a misunderstanding about exactly what we were after.
Yeah, just going back to late last year when we were discussing the evidence, the discussion was centred around figure 8.6 in technical report A, which is a map showing the predicted increase in average suspended solids at surface and increment above background. And it showed the map showing the extent of the 2 milligrams per litre and 5 milligram per litre suspended solids plume based on the median. And what we were expecting for the 25th and 75th percentile were maps of a similar type, but showing the 2 and 5 milligram per litre concentrations at the 25th and 75th percentile.
All right. Well, I'll have a response for you today about what we can do about that and when you can expect it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the clarification.
Any preliminary matters from the parties to raise before we get started today? Nothing? Okay, well, first up, we've got the EPA. Now, do we have Mr. Blaker online? Hello, Mr. Blaker.
Yes. Hello.
Okay, we've got some documents from you. I think your submission that you're presenting today has been tabled as document number 112.
That's right.
So we'll hand over to you to present that, and we'll ask you to screen share any documents that you might be referring to, just so we here in the room and also people online are able to follow along with what you're saying.
Of course. Thank you very much, Ms. Carlisle. The committee will have seen the EPA's written closing submissions filed yesterday, and as Member Carlisle has mentioned, that's document 112. If the committee has that, you will see that it is structured so as to firstly make a covering submission on the role of the EPA in this inquiry, and that is pages 1 and 2. The submission then contains a table beginning on the 3rd page. If we can just scroll down, thank you, Ms. Hall. And that table lists in the left-hand column the recommendations that the EPA made in what I will call its pre-hearing written submissions dated the 24th of October 2024. Over in the right-hand column, the EPA has given its comments on whether each recommendation has, in its view, been satisfactorily addressed through changes to proposed mitigation measures. Now, where the EPA has indicated in the right-hand column that a matter is closed, what that means is that the issue initially identified by the EPA is no longer a matter that would, in the EPA's submission, cause the committee to negatively appraise the project's environmental effects as being unacceptable. So it is always, when we have that indication of closed, a submission directed to assisting the committee in its functions under its terms of reference. It is, of course, not intended to communicate conclusions that the EPA will need to make in deciding the applications for development licenses on the facts available at the time of those decisions, and of course having regard to the Minister's assessment flowing from this inquiry. Before I take the committee through the highlights of the table, I just want to address a matter arising from the proponent submissions at the very end of yesterday's hearing in about the last half an hour. My friend for the proponent expressed surprise that the EPA has recommendations in its table that A, relate to noise and B, remain open. The proponent seems to have taken from document 96, and I'll ask Ms. Hall to go to that. Thank you. The confusion seems to have arisen from this document. This is the EPA's response to the committee's questions, and it's a document filed on the 18th of December. What has happened in our submission, in the EPA submission, is that the proponent has simply and with respect misread this document. If I can take the committee to paragraph 2, the heading above that paragraph, you'll see that it's an update on the EPA's recommendations 3, which relates to marine environment, so that could be ignored, and 11 and 14. Those two recommendations do relate to noise. But if I can now take the committee back to our table in our closing submissions, and if we scroll down, what will be seen is that recommendations 11 and 14 are indeed closed and indicated to be so, which is perfectly consistent with document 96 that we were looking at a moment ago. The recommendations relating to noise that are open are recommendations 7, 9, and 10, which I'll speak to this morning. But they are not recommendations referred to in document 96. So there just seems to have been a misreading of that document 96. And there are 3 recommendations related to noise that are open. Moving on from that issue and taking a closer look at the table, the EPA's recommendations have related to 3 categories of environmental effects, being the marine environment, that's recommendations 1 to 3, air quality, recommendations 3 to 6, and noise, it's recommendations 7 to 19. I can be brief in taking the committee through the EPA's closing submissions as to which of the recommendations remain open and so being unaddressed deserve consideration by the committee in the preparation of its report. Okay, so starting from the top of the table, the EPA's first 3 recommendations have related to the marine environment. The EPA has said in its opening written submissions that the EPA is broadly satisfied with the rigour of the studies undertaken as part of Technical Report A concerning the marine environment. The EPA's recommendations 1 to 3 have been directed to increasing the robustness of the environmental management framework, particularly around monitoring of the project's ongoing effects on the marine environment. So starting with the EPA's first recommendation, the committee can treat that as having been addressed, but because there have just been some day 2 changes in relation to the associated mitigation measures, I'll just have something to say about this recommendation, even though the EPA treats it as closed. The recommendation was the monitoring of light attenuation during dredging operations, in particular monitoring of light attenuation over the seagrass beds proximate to the proposed dredging activities, including in the Ramsar site. It was also recommended that the monitoring trigger actions where necessary to reduce that light attenuation. The proponent has, in response to that recommendation, proposed a new mitigation measure, ME05A, and I'll just ask Ms. Hall to take us to that. That's document 101, page 17 at the top of the page. What is proposed there is that turbidity and light attenuation monitoring will be conducted commencing 12 months prior to the dredging in order to create threshold limits, and past those limits, warnings and actions will be triggered in accordance with mitigation measure ME05, the beginning of which you can just see at the bottom of the screen at the moment. So those were post-exhibition changes circulated on day 1. The day 2 change is in ME05A. It's a proposal, and you'll see it highlighted in purple, in purple tracking, sorry. It's a proposal following Dr. Wallace's and Dr. Edmonds' oral evidence to place the light attenuation monitors at the same site as the turbidity monitors, the EPA just wishes to communicate that it is content with that change. Now, moving on to recommendation 2, this is marked in our table as an open recommendation. The recommendation relates to the project's ongoing impacts upon seagrass and plankton. The recommendation was put one way initially, but then clarified in the EPA's opening written submissions, which I need not take you to, but just for reference, document 68, page 14, paragraph 57. The recommendation was for the project's operational impacts on seagrass and plankton to be measured and mitigated as a separate mitigation measure, judged against thresholds that would be identified by the proponent. Now, I mentioned that this is marked as open at the moment, but can I please also observe, if we scroll up to the very top of the table, please, Ms. Hall, to the very top. Over on the right-hand column, you'll see that we've mentioned that these are EPA comments as at 10 January 2025. That's the same day that the day 2 changes to the mitigation measures were filed. And so for that reason, there's just a bit of updating to do, which I'll now do now. Okay, what's written there does not take into account 2 day 2 mitigation measures that the proponent has proposed in materials filed Friday last week. The first is an extension to mitigation measure ME19, which Ms. Hall, please, thank you very much. This is document 101 again at page 22. And the second, which we'll scroll down to a bit later, is a new mitigation measure ME21. It's in the same document, page 23. Starting with ME19, what has been done there is the day 2 inclusion of 4 words at the end of the description of the measure. You'll see that the effect, and again, this is the purple tracking, the effect of those words is to repurpose a measure that was already proposed to be taken. The measure is to monitor the baseline impacts of existing discharges from the refinery, and that measure will now be taken partly to identify suitable thresholds. If we then come down to page 23 of the same document and mitigation measure ME21, just over the page, thank you. This is a new measure, as you can see from the tracking. It would require monitoring of the effects of entrainment by the FSRU on plankton, with the monitoring to occur, as we read it, 12 months before and 12 months after the commencement of the FSRU's operations. The intention seems to be that thresholds will be informed both by the first 12 months of monitoring and by the monitoring of plankton already undertaken as part of the supplementary EES process. My instructions are that the EPA has not, with the time and personnel available, formed a definitive view on the adequacy of those amendments in ME19 and ME21. I'm in a position, though, just to make one observation, which is that while these day 2 inclusions do provide for monitoring and the creation of thresholds, no trigger actions are prescribed in the event that those thresholds are exceeded from our reading of these changes. So in that sense, and on its face, that there is an element of our recommendation that has not yet been addressed. Okay, moving to recommendation 3. This recommendation is closed. I'll make a very brief comment about it. The recommendation was that the proponent provide information on the chemicals that may be used as anti-scaling, anti-rust, and biological growth treatment for the cooling water and cooling tower at the refinery. The proponent's response, which I don't need to take you to, is in supplementary technical note, tabled document 25, paragraphs 15 to 16, and the response is that no anti-scaling or anti-rust treatments would be added to the seawater in the FSRU, nor added as part of the refinery system. and currently only sodium hypochlorite is used to treat water used in the refinery to control biological growth. The EPA may have questions about how, then, problems of rusting and scaling are sought to be avoided so that the EPA can feel assurance that there are not chemicals that will ultimately need to be used to address such problems, and that will be discharged into the bay. But that is a matter that the EPA considers it can deal with as appropriate at a later stage through any continuation of the development license process. Okay, so that deals with the marine environment. The next recommendations 4 through to 6 relate to air quality. Recommendation 4, this is marked as open. It relates to the Minister's directions, item 11, which is to consider the implications of bubble limits and stack limits for sensitive receptors. In talking about stack-specific limits, the committee will recall that we are talking about limits on nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, volatile organic compounds, perhaps among some other pollutants, where the limits are placed on each stack or discharge point. And the supplementary EES identified 6 stacks for the project. In talking about bubble limits, we are talking about instead annual limits on the discharge of these pollutants from the FSRU as a whole. The proponent's proposal, the committee will recall, is to use a combination of stack-specific limits and bubble limits. Simply for the committee's reference, that proposal is summarised between PDF pages 145 to 147 of the supplementary EES. The concern that the EPA presently holds in relation to that approach is that the stack limits under that proposal are placed at the level where engines and boilers are operating at 100% load. So to quote from page 145 of the supplementary EES covering document, there it's explained that, quote, emission rates calculated based on 100% load of each engine and boiler are proposed to be the emission limits for each stack. The work then done under the proponent's proposal to limit the emissions is the proposed bubble limits, which you would find on PDF page 146 of the EES. The EPA's concern with relying on bubble limits is that they would not, like stack limits, operate as ongoing constraints on air pollution, and so would not to the same degree encourage the proponent to minimise that air pollution consistently with the environmental duty. It would rather allow pollution to a bubble limit. The EPA appreciates that there's been discussion during the hearing of the possibility that if stack limits and stack limits alone were used, there could be perverse incentives for trains to be run and for stacks to be operating and emitting at lower rates, but with more stacks operating and emitting to come within those stack limits. We simply point out that it may be that with some thought, stack limits could be developed that would avoid those kinds of issues. And something which is mentioned in the far right-hand corner is that the EPA will consider, the far right-hand side of recommendation 4 on the table is that the EPA will consider this matter when it is completing the assessments of the development license applications. Recommendations 5 and 6, we can skip past, and I'll just rely on what's written there in the table. There are 2 recommendations that are closed.
Can you hear me, Mr. Blaker?
And sorry, can you please?
Hear us?
I can hear you now, yes.
Okay, the chair had a question for you. This is...
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Just before you move off the bubble limit, stack limits, we've been talking about this for a little while now. The EPA's concern around how bubble limits are inconsistent with general environmental duty, and they're perceived as something that allows the proponent to pollute up to a certain level rather than an upper limit with, you've still got to continually drive down your emissions. I still really don't understand why a bubble limit operates that way and stack limits do not operate that way.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll say two things in response to that. The first is that the Chair will appreciate that the EPA has developed this point in its pre-hearing submissions at pages 19 to 20 and in its written opening submissions at pages 15 to 16, paragraphs 66 to 75. And what will be seen there is that the crux of the concern is that bubble limits would allow at a later point in the year, if the proponent is tracking well relative to those limits, to pollute, if you like, more freely and not behave in a way which is minimising that pollution. So as a matter of concept, that is what I understand the concern to be.
But the general environmental duty prevents them from doing that.
Indeed. And I think the point that the EPA makes is that it would be ideal if the conditions ultimately placed on the license themselves are expressive of the requirements of that duty, rather than sort of leaving room within the conditions for the duty to be complied with or not complied with. If the committee has any further questions on this issue, the EPA would be happy to take them on notice and answer them in writing in the next 2 days.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so let's now turn to noise. So this is recommendations 7 to 19. Of these recommendations, only 3 remain open in the EPA's view, and it will be enough to speak only to those 3 open noise recommendations. Okay, so the first of those open recommendations is recommendation 7. The supplementary EES is supported by technical report D, of course, relating to noise. And that technical study proposes project noise criteria at page Roman numeral 6 of the report. And those criteria are calculated to be 10 decibels below the recalculated noise limit for each sensitive receiver. And the purpose of those criteria, as the committee has heard, would be to ensure that the project does not contribute to the cumulative noise at those sensitive receiver sites. Thank you, Ms. Hall. So taking the committee to mitigation measure NV05, this is document 101 again at page 32. That measure is the preparation of an operational framework through all stages of the project to, among other things, and coming to the second dot point you see there, prevent the contribution of the project to the cumulative emission of unreasonable noise. It is worth drawing to the committee's attention that the measure does not commit to any particular project noise criteria and does not commit to the project noise criteria in technical report D, which took that, what I'll call 10 decibel below limit approach. That is notable in circumstances where Mr. Evans' expert statement has set out alternative project noise criteria, which the committee will recall. Those criteria do not take the 10 decibel below approach evenly in terms of each sensitive receptor, and instead accommodate the project in making as much noise as would bring the cumulative noise at the receiver sites to the recalculated limits. The EPA's view is that an even 10 decibel below approach applied evenly in respect of sensitive receivers would be appropriately cautious. That is including in light of the inherent uncertainty in measurements of decibels. And because, as appears from Mr. Tardio's evidence in document 42, pages 8 to 9, and I might ask Ms. Hall to bring that up. There being no rush to do so. Thank you, Ms. Hall. So yes, document 42, pages 8 to 9, and they contain paragraphs 30 to 31. As that's being brought up, I'll just observe that the evidence there is that the noise contributed by the refinery may be greater than the technical study assumed. Mr. Tardio's evidence there was that while the RTA report stated that the RTA recorded noise up to a level of 47 A-weighted decibels from the refinery at Geelong Grammar School, Mr. Tardio in the same period measured the same value to be approximately 50 A-weighted decibels. So that's a difference of 3. Now, that's what the committee will see from that document, and it might be that at this stage we can move past it. Thank you. Okay, recommendation 9. This is the second last open recommendation that I'm going to speak to. This 9th recommendation was that the proponent provide a further justification for the selection of BG4 as a background equivalent location for Geelong Grammar School. The committee will recall that technical report D found that noise levels at Geelong Grammar School are influenced by intrusive noise from existing industry, while the noise levels recorded at the location in Avalon College, or BG4, it's a southern site within that college, are not. BG4 was selected in the technical study as the background equivalent location for Geelong Grammar School. The reasons given are at PDF page 41, marked as page 30 of the technical report. On day 3 of this hearing, Mr. Evans gave evidence that he had visited both the Geelong Grammar and the Avalon College sites, and that he considered Avalon to be suitably representative of the Geelong Grammar site. The EPA does continue to hold some concerns about the selection of the Avalon College site as a background equivalent for Geelong Grammar School. Those concerns are set out in the EPA's pre-hearing submissions for the committee's reference at pages 26 and 27. The concern really is with the robustness of the justification for the selection of BG4 as a background equivalent location, particularly during the night period. That is because it seems that a significant reason for the choice of BG4 was that it was, to quote technical study D at page 30, a similar rural school with students residing within the school grounds. Whether that justifies BG4 as a background equivalent location during the day, it seemingly would not at night, when schools can be expected to be less active, if not inactive. Another reason for the choice of BG4 seems to have been distance from the coast, as appears from PDF page 41 of the technical report. But noises from coastal waters and wave action do not appear from the technical report to be a salient part of the noise environment at Geelong Grammar School. If I could ask Ms. Hall to take us to the technical report D, PDF page 35. This is table 5 in that report. Thank you very much, Ms. Hall. So this is a table reporting the RTA's attended noise measurements at night. It observes that noise sources observed at Geelong Grammar, they were stated to include, you'll see there, existing refinery noise, B-line train noise, Princes Highway traffic noise, and birds and tree noise. For example, wave action and such noises emanating from the ocean were not identified as a salient noise that was part of the noise environment there. Noise from traffic is another consideration. Tables 3 and 5, which we're presently looking at, of the technical report indicate that noise from traffic on the Princes Freeway is a component of the background sound environment at Geelong Grammar School. However, due to the difference in distance from the freeway, the contribution of distant traffic noise to background levels at Geelong Grammar School, which the EPA calculates is between 1.3 and 2 kilometres away from the freeway, would not be well represented by measurements at BG4. That site being the EPA calculates about 3.5 kilometres away from the freeway. There is lastly a question raised by Table 4 in the technical study. This, Ms. Hall, is PDF page 3023. Thank you very much. This is the issue that the EPA put to Mr. Evans in cross-examination. The committee will see there that whereas locations unaffected by refinery noise, so examples are BG7 towards the bottom of that table, Walker Street, another is BG8, which is Avalon Road. Whereas these locations have lower background noises at night, so taking as an example Walker Street, you see that during the day it's 40, L90 A-weighted decibels, and then it's 39 in the evening and then drops to 35. So there's a difference of 5 between day and night. There isn't that kind of change when it comes to BG4, which is seen at 39 decibels during the day, 39 in the evening, and then 1 decibel lower at night. There isn't in the technical study or the other evidence a reason for why that is, and without a reason, the committee may not feel satisfied that BG4 is a satisfactory background equivalent to Geelong Grammar School. Another way of putting the point is this. There is a question as to whether or not at the Geelong Grammar School sites, if one takes away the intrusive noise from the refinery, the background noise would have a similar jump downwards at night. So that's to say, whether it would jump down more significantly, as in, for example, BG7 at night, or jump down less significantly, as in BG4, the Southern Avalon College site. Moving to the very last open recommendation, which can be addressed very briefly. This is the EPA's recommendation 10, again relating to noise. The recommendation was for the proponent to provide the values of the noise levels and meteorological data reported in the diagrams of sections B3 and B4 of Appendix B of Technical Report D. And I'll ask Ms. Hall to take us to those. They begin at PDF page 89. It's marked as page 70 of the technical report document. And as can be seen there, both the y-axis and the x-axis are quite compressed. And so it is difficult to discern from the tables what the precise values are that are recorded there. And at what precise times those values were recorded. These are important measurements, of course. These are measurements of background noise levels that informed the report's recalculation of the regulatory noise limits per the noise protocol. So the EPA does request a table of the underlying data along the lines put in the EPA's written closing submissions in the table. That is the meteorological data, including rainfall, together with the noise values. Now, the very last matter to address is the Day 2 Planning Scheme Amendment. This is document 100, filed last Friday. The EPA has no observations to make on that document, consistent with its approach to the Day 1 version of it. Unless the committee has any other questions, those are the EPA submissions in closing. Sorry, Chair Carlisle, you might be on mute.
Sorry, I thought the microphones. Oh no, hang on.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You can. Okay. Now I forgot what my question was. Oh yes, it was in relation to, so just using recommendation 10 as an example, that sort of just wanting a bit more, as I understand it, you're wanting a bit more granularity in the data that was used to derive the background or to measure the background noise levels. That one remains open. There are some other recommendations that are listed as closed but not dealt with. They'll be dealt with in the course of assessing the development license applications if we get to that point. I'm just wondering why recommendation 10, for instance, is open, whereas some of those other recommendations you're happy to defer those to the development license application process. Is there something that you think the committee needs to understand in seeing that level of granular detail before finalising our assessment?
I think that the thinking is this: it's very important data. And it seems appropriate that the committee is able to understand the data. So that's the thinking behind leaving recommendation 10 open. Mm-hmm. And I don't understand the submission to be much more developed than that.
Okay. Member O'Neill has a question for you.
Thank you for your submissions. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for the submissions. It appeared that you were reading from speaking notes. Rather than us having to totally rely on transcribing the audio, is it possible that you could circulate your speaking notes to the committee just to aid some of the references you provided where I didn't capture? It would be handy to have your speaking notes if possible, please.
Of course, Member O'Neill.
Thank you.
Yeah, we've got some other questions for you. I'll go to Member Burgermeister first.
Thank you. Mr. Blake, in relation to recommendation 10, can you take me to where in the EPA guidelines or any published documents it requires hourly or half hourly or 15-minute meteorological data to be published along with noise level measurements in terms of establishing the background noise levels?
Member Bergmeister, can I please take that question on notice? Yes. Okay, thank you. And I should add that we'd propose to respond in writing in the next 2 days.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep, in relation to recommendation 2, you said that EPA submission was prepared simultaneously with the day 2 EPRs, and so they don't respond to the day 2 EPRs. Is EPA proposing to update its position on recommendation 2 based on the day 2 EPRs?
The EPA will be happy to provide an updated position in writing, and so perhaps we can endeavour to do that.
We've got a process set up. I know you've only become involved in the matter fairly recently, Mr. Blaker, but there's a process set up for parties to make further drafting comments on the mitigation measures after we receive the proponents' final versions with their reply submissions, if there are any updates to the day 2 version. So if we could ask the EPA to provide any further modifications to the mitigation measures through that process, that would be much appreciated.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay. All right, thanks for coming along and thanks for your submissions.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have the Surf Coast Energy Group. Mr. Stockton, I can see you there online and ready to go.
Good morning, Advisory Committee and panel chair. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, I'll just see if I can share my PowerPoint. If I begin now, that's okay. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Just slideshow. Okay, so dear Inquiry and Advisory Committee, thank you for the chance to submit to this inquiry. This brief presentation aims to assist the panel in understanding the broader implications of climate change and associated economic costs from fossil fuel use. We provide this information as an adjunct to our written submission, which outlined our concerns about the potential impact this proposal brings at the local level for nature in our backyard, part of which is Ramsar listed. This presentation zooms outward and will inform the panel about continued climate forcing, the implications for nature locally, and more broadly, and the costs therein. Some background: SCEG formed in 2008 around the issue of climate change, but soon realised it was just part of a much broader sustainability issue, as highlighted by Johan Rockström's pioneering work around Planet Earth, 9 Planetary Boundaries, first published in 2009. We've transgressed 6 of those 9 planetary boundaries already. Systems thinking to navigate our planned response across 4 E's, those being ecology, energy, economy, and equity. With that in mind, it is hard to understand the logic behind this terminal and the panel hearing essentially paying great heed to potential local impacts, but ignoring the certainties that accompany climate forcing, to which this terminal is a significant contributor. Moving back to Johan Rockström, in August 2024, he did a TED talk. It's only 18 minutes long. It would be immensely useful for the panel to look at it if they want to catch up on where we're at with climate change. But just a few highlights. We will be at 1.5 degrees Celsius within the next 5 to 10 years. That's officially. We need to note that in 2024, we already are at 1.5 degrees Celsius climate change, and that just needs to go for a bit longer according to the Paris Accord to be officially recognised as 1.5. We'll be at 2 degrees Celsius within 20 years and 3 degrees plus by 2100. In terms of impacts, it's important to note that coral reefs globally are in terminal decline at 1.2 degrees Celsius. To have a 50% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees Celsius, there is only 200 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent left in our carbon budget. Globally, we are using 40 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent every year. So that means we have just 5 years left in our carbon budget. We're officially at 1.3 degrees climate change now. Up till 2014, temperature increase sat at around 0.18 degrees Celsius per decade. However, since 2014, there has been a temperature acceleration, moving to 0.26 Celsius increase per decade, up from 0.18 Celsius per decade before then. Scientists still don't know why. The graph that's in front of you now references current socio-economic trends and their impacts on the Earth system. The important thing to note is not so much the details of each, but the vertical trajectories of all, as they show trends and subsequent impacts to the Earth system from 1950. So what does this mean for the current EES for the Viva terminal? We've already seen how there is an interactive influence between humanity's many economic endeavours as well as on planetary services. This slide illustrates even more finely the strong interactive feedback loop between human-induced climate change and biodiversity, which is what we're focused on in Corio Bay. As climate change accelerates, biodiversity is diminished. As biodiversity is diminished, climate change accelerates. Notwithstanding all this, a quick Google search on fossil fuel activity shows the planet is awash with fossil fuel exploration and extraction. This is just a quick snapshot of Google. These are all indicators of global corporate energy reality, profiteering, and future motives and priorities. So what is Australia doing? In fact, Australia has done very little to reduce emissions from industry. Since 2005, Australia has actually done relatively little to reduce the burning of fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas. In fact, the latest data shows industry emissions are pretty much at similar levels to what they were back then in 2005. The only really big cuts so far have happened in the land sector by felling fewer trees and planting more. All other emissions combined are now nearly identical to what they were in 2005. Indeed, the same article shows industrial fugitive emissions in Australia in 2005 at 43 million tonnes carbon dioxide equivalent and 48 million tonnes in 2023. So that I've just posted that graph on PowerPoint. Online, it's interactive and you can see those changes. The next one is tipping points. Tipping points. There are 5 tipping points that we are set to cross at around 1.5 degrees Celsius, all of which heighten the risk of a cascade of positive feedback loops globally. If we take just one example, the Amazon basin, modelling shows it is likely to flip from rainforest to savanna if deforestation reaches 20 to 25%, along with 1.5 to 2 degrees of climate heating. It is already at 17% deforestation, and we already have 1.3 degrees Celsius climate increase. We will be at 1.5 degrees Celsius officially, as mentioned before, within 5 to 10 years, and 2 degrees Celsius within 20 years. Next, economic benefits versus economic costs. The world's 10 most costly climate disasters of 2024 caused $229 billion in damages and killed 2,000 people. That's the top 10. The latest annual analysis of insurance payouts has revealed. From an economic perspective, in 2024, there was over $200 billion USD in cost to the global economy, or around 320 billion Australian dollars. Modelling shows an 18% loss in GDP by 2050 if we follow the current trajectory. This is equivalent to $38 trillion USD or $61 trillion Australian worth of GDP loss per year by 2050. So the implications and summary for the EES on Corio Bay. A, SCEG accepts that a local EES is valuable. We don't deny that, but only if it is accompanied by an EES that assesses climate change modelling based on our current trajectory. Otherwise, we're all just wasting our time. B, given this proposal is analysing a matter of national environmental significance, it deserves a fair review. C, that the EES needs to include scenarios for a minimum of 2-degree temperature effect on Corio Bay's ecology and a maximum of around 3-degree temperature increase, as this is where we are actually tracking, despite 30 years of science sounding the alarm. D, if there isn't an EES based on all the accumulated climate science we now have at our fingertips, does that mean that somehow the Corio Bay environment is immune to sea level rise, ocean acidification, rising atmospheric and marine temperatures, and subsequent loss in biodiversity, drought and bushfire, etc., etc.? E, if there isn't going to be a climate-based EES, can the panel at least acknowledge the grave shortcomings of the current EES, especially as all the overwhelming evidence shows increasing emissions from here on are likely to overwhelm ecosystem stability worldwide within 10 years? F, on a positive note, SCEG observes that in point 35 of the Inquiry and Advisory Committee terms of reference for the Supplementary Environmental Effects Statement for the Viva Energy Gas Terminal project, it states that the IAC may inform itself in any way it sees fit. We strenuously urge them to do just that. Finally, SCEG is hoping that when the panel weighs up the jobs and growth in Geelong that comes with the Viva terminal, they will also pay close attention to the costs, as highlighted in this mini video by former senior World Bank economist Herman Daly, produced in the 1990s and even more insightful today. Can someone put that video on, please?
Base of economic growth, global economic growth, strong growth, solid growth.
Economic growth is the guiding principle that around which society coheres. Well, exactly what is it that is growing? We always say economic growth. If you try to write into your computer uneconomic growth, it'll give you an error signal and it'll say, well, misspelling or something. But that's a real concept. Growth can be uneconomic. It can cost more than it's worth. And that's the new era that we're moving into, and we have to come to recognize that. Once you get in your mind a picture of, here's the Earth biosphere, here's the economy, you begin to see, how does the economy live off the larger system? That's not really hard to understand. As the economy expands, it takes in more energy, more matter. It takes it from where? From the biosphere. And as we consume more, we throw out more waste. Where do we throw it? Back to the biosphere. So that's depletion and that's pollution. And then we move into an era of uneconomic growth, in which growth increases the production of bads faster than the production of goods. It accumulates filth faster than wealth. How big can these inputs of materials and energy be? How big can the outflow of waste be before it begins to foul up? That's not really hard to understand. I mean, I can explain that to my grandchildren.
So that's my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Stockton. You have raised issues that are really beyond the 4 issues that our remit are confined to. But nevertheless, I want to thank you for the time that's obviously gone into preparing those submissions, and thanks for coming along today and presenting them to us.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
See you. Okay, do we have Mr. Reeves here?
Well, would you like me to begin?
Yes, we haven't got, you haven't pre-circulated any
No, I have not.
documents?
No,
No, that's okay. I just wanted to make sure I
Yeah,
wasn't
thank
missing
you.
something.
Yeah. Great to be here, and thanks for your time and seeing me again. My name is Simon Reeves, and I'm presenting today on behalf of the Good Neighbourhood Project. Also a resident of Norlane, which essentially sits on the doorstep of the refinery, and the bay, or Paniel Park, Burners Bay, and all that. It's essentially almost like our front yard, and it's a pretty nice front yard to have. So I lived there in Norlane for the past 12 years with my wife, Kayleen, and our young family. And we've got many friends and family members who live in this neighbourhood. And my wife, Kayleen, and I, we run an organisation in the area called the Good Neighbourhood Project, which was formerly Norlane Community Initiatives, which is what I presented under last time. We've had a brand change since then. We're essentially a place-based community development organisation, which means we take a whole of neighbourhood, whole of person, whole of environment approach to the work in which we do. And our focus in particular is neighbourhood Norlane, where we're really hoping to create a neighbourhood that is both beautiful, welcoming, inclusive, sustainable, and a wonderful place to live. And unfortunately, though, we have many struggles in this neighbourhood of Norlane. As some of you might know, we really struggle in terms of our social and economic and environmental disadvantages. The CEFA index has unfortunately given us the tag of the #1 most socially, economically, environmentally disadvantaged neighbourhood in all of Victoria. As a result, there is massive amounts of low income, insecure housing, poor physical, mental health conditions for people, struggles with education, poor nutrition, poor air quality, and lots of unemployment or underemployment. And as a direct result of this poverty, the life expectancy for people who live in the neighbourhood in Norlane is on average 10 years lower than anywhere else in Geelong. And for us, this is not just a stat. This is people we know. Several people have passed away since I last presented to this panel. People still young through illnesses which are preventable. Even just over Christmas, we had one of our op shop volunteers pass away. She lived on Forster Street, just not too far away from the refinery. But despite some of these obstacles and challenges, we also have a lot of strengths in our neighbourhood, strong social connections, strong relationships with each other. People will share their last dollar to help each other out. Lots of resilience in the face of hardships, and lots of pride in our neighbourhood. A real sense of community. It's very affordable. We have parks and gardens, like I mentioned, very close to the bay, and a brand new pool as well. So our organisation aims to build on these strengths, to cultivate community, help regenerate our neighbourhood, and advocate for the place in which we live. We're quite a small organisation with I would say, a fairly large footprint. We have 3 sites in the neighbourhood in which we work from, which our people gather. We have over 60 volunteers who help run these sites. We have a network of hundreds of residents who engage and impact upon thousands from the northern suburbs each year. Through things like affordable cafes, $5 lunches, if anyone wants to pop down there later, community meals, urban farms, activity groups, events, shops, and much more. Our main areas of work is around the food security piece, social belonging, social enterprises, and helping people to engage and participate in the community and in the neighbourhood, especially for those who are out of work and doing it tough, and helping people ask the question, how do we be good neighbours? And what is a good neighbourhood? What does a good neighbourhood look like? Which I think are relevant questions for us here today as well. So I'm not really here to say anything new. I think in my last presentation, I did mention I'm not an expert in a number of these issues which we're facing, but I can advocate for our local community. and raise these concerns. And I hope by the fact that I'm back here today does illustrate how serious these concerns are for us. So I would like to simply just reiterate what I've already said through these two submissions and the previous presentation. But before I do, I would like to note that over this time, Viva has listened and improved their community engagement process. That was one of the things I talked about last time. Their dialogue and their education for the local community has been really improved, and that's been very helpful for us. And I also want to note Viva continues to be a good and active contributor to the local community, which is highly commendable. So I'm not really here today to rally against Viva or anything like that, but to simply reiterate and raise our ongoing concerns with this particular proposal of the gas terminal, and in particular its social and environmental impacts on our local residents, their physical, mental and health and overall well-being. The first point, just I want to reiterate, is our safety concerns. I know these are no longer the purview of this panel, but I still need to say we remain unconvinced around that this is a good idea to place such a facility so close to residents' homes and our neighbourhood. I know there are safety procedures and these have been gone over in the previous panel protocols, but still the question remains about the what in the 1 million scenario. I know 1 in a million is not the right, that's just a metaphor, please go with me on that one. The 1 in a million scenario, you know, it's not likely, of course, but that is something that we do have to live with by living in Norlane. We already live within the shadow of the refinery, and that also has a, you know, 1 in a million risk. But the addition of a gas terminal on top of that is adding a second one for us to have to live with. Even 2 days ago, we had an amazing storm pass through Geelong with lightning, thunder, huge amounts of rain. We heard the sirens going off in the morning for about half an hour, big plumes of smoke coming from the smokestack. My kids and I, and from all accounts on Facebook, countless others were wondering what was going on, as we do when the sirens go off and the smokestack starts billowing out the smoke. Hoping everything's okay. You know, my kids know people who, you know, coaches and things who work there. And of course, everything was okay. We eventually got the message through from the SMS system, which is working really well, stating everything is fine, don't worry. But of course, everything is always fine until it's not. And with the new facility comes new dangers. So, you know, our question is, why does this have to be located so close to our homes and our community? And can we guarantee 100% there is no increased safety risk to our local residents? The second point I want to reiterate is potential loss of access to valuable community space. As I've already stated in my last submission, access to the bay is extremely important for local residents of our neighbourhood. Panmure Park surrounding area serves as a vital community space for local residents, providing essential access to natural areas for recreation, relaxation and social connection. Last time I shared a story about how our community gathers there on New Year's Eve at Panmure Park. We have barbecues, picnics, kids go swimming, and we all sit there and watch the 9 o'clock fireworks together as the sun goes down. A wonderful time, and once again on New Year's Eve we gathered and did that. And as I sat there this year watching the fireworks, I reckon we got the best view of the fireworks across the bay there. I thought to myself, we just, you know, we can't lose any of this. This is just so important and special for our local community. So the questions are, you know, how much does this proposed gas terminal threaten access to this cherished resource of the bay and the areas around there? It's a particular concern given that exposure to green and blue spaces is crucial for reducing stress, depression and anxiety in a community already facing multiple challenges like this. It's also a safe place for people to gather in events of extreme heat. So will it continue to be a safe space? Will people continue to access the bay? Will there be restrictions? Will people feel comfortable swimming, fishing, boating, picnicking, especially as the tankers are sailing past within a stone's throw? We feel like we still don't have satisfactory answers to these questions. And so my question is, can it be guaranteed there will be no impact on restrictions or loss of access to the bay, walking, riding, swimming, boating, taking dogs for a walk, fishing, etc. My third point is around noise and air pollution. And just to reiterate, our concerns still remain around this aspect. Norlane residents already face significant noise and air pollution from existing industrial activities. I lie awake at 10:30 at night listening to the hum of the industries. And we have serious concerns about how the addition of another major hazard facility would impact and worsen these issues. particularly given the inadequate local air quality monitoring and potential health impacts. So can it be guaranteed that there won't be any additional noise or air pollution added to our lives and those of us who live here? And some might say, well, you choose to live in a neighbourhood that's in a highly industrial area, and that is true for some of us. We did move into the area where there was a known refinery. We chose to live with that, but we haven't chosen to live with our gas terminal. This is being imposed on us. And for many, I would say as well, they didn't actually get to choose to move into this area and live underneath the refinery or a gas terminal. For those who are part of public housing, social housing, or who are renting and living in Norlane because it is probably the most affordable place in all of Geelong, don't let that get out. People like that didn't get to choose the location of where they lived. And I would also really question whether any other suburb in Geelong would accept a proposed gas terminal in their neighbourhood or on their doorstep. So I'm going to leave things there, keep it fairly short today. As I mentioned at the start, I'm not an expert in any of these technical matters, but our community needs those who are experts to answer these questions for us, impartial experts, to guarantee that this proposal has no negative impact on our neighbourhood. And for those residents who already face incredible hardship and obstacles, as I mentioned, that they are not given any more obstacles or hardships to overcome that affects their quality of life, health and wellbeing. If there are any safety concerns, loss of amenities, increased noise or air pollution, then I would urge you to please not sign off on this proposal. If it adds any weight of disadvantage to a community that already experiences the most highest number of disadvantages in all of Victoria, please don't sign off on this proposal. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Mr. Reeves. Thanks for your submissions. Okay, next up we have the Geelong One Fire Reconciliation Group. Ms. Grosser.
Got shorter legs. Hello. Thank you for the work that you're all doing in listening to our contributions from the community. I'm Vicky Grosser. I'm the president of Geelong One Fire Reconciliation Group, and I've been a member for the past 15 years. And the organisation was established over 30 years ago as a partnership between local First Nations peoples and allies journeying together around reconciliation. And I'd like to start because I love living on Wadawurrung country. I think it's an enormous honour to live here on these beautiful lands and cultures. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah, getting me in the picture. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on Wadawurrung country and pay respects to elders past and present, not just the Wadawurrung traditional owners themselves, who have been enormous teachers for us in Geelong One Fire, but for the broad First Nations community of Geelong, a tongue of land where we are now. Because many of First Nations people chose to live here, but many did not. It's got the highest incidence of stolen generation population outside Naarm, Melbourne. So it's a very intricate and skilled and generous community that we, as the paid membership of Geelong One Fire, are allies across a number of parts of the community. And it includes organisations or representatives or members of organisations, some of which are presenting here today and tomorrow, like the Australian Conservation Foundation, and faith-based groups, including the Baha'i community, who are extremely oneness-based in terms of the way they think about people and connection with humanity and, with all of the creatures of the world. So our membership has been quite taken aback by this proposal, and I come here representing our committee, but unanimously our membership, where we increasingly see the potential impacts of fossil fuel, or existing ones, fossil fuel industry and profit making at the expense of First Nations on this country. In addition to my very lucky role of being the president of One Fire, I trained 10 years ago from working in the welfare sector. I moved across after a diploma at the Gordon TAFE to train as a carbon manager. So I'm a Cert 4 trained carbon manager. And I'd like to acknowledge Graham's presentation from SCEG and his clarity in which he connects the really important three components of social, economical and environmental impacts of climate change, climate emergency, I now call it. And in that area, my particular connection with the Wadawurrung traditional owners was that I was employed for a piece of work through West Wind Energy about 8 years ago now, when they developed the Rokewood wind farm just northwest of here on Golden Plains. And my role was to talk with and listen and gain information and guidance and input from the Wadawurrung elders. And they took the staff team, some of the staff team and myself on country and taught us a great deal. And there are many challenges for having a growing population on this country. And for us, we in One Fire absolutely object to this proposal. No other reservations whatsoever. This is Wadawurrung land and sea country. And in the 1930s and into 40s, this country was rapidly and sometimes very violently colonised and settled by Europeans. And in fact, my mother's family came to the gold rush in the North Wadawurrung country at Ballarat in the 1850s. And so I have made a point of learning an enormous amount, as much as I can, and listening. And we talk a great deal about these issues and the impacts in One Fire. And in the late 1830s, 1840s, the Hopetown Channel was created by digging a huge chunk out of a piece of land that connected the north of what's now called Corio Bay, Sandy Bay, and the south, which is Mulapio, Mulap area. And it was done in order to create access for larger boats to bring in sheep, to eat the murnon, to be profit for Europeans. And I think we have to face the realities and the impacts of colonisation. I think we're all good people living on this country. In One Fire, we have strong relationships across all of our membership, and we share our stories and we talk honestly and we try and share them with others. And that's what I bring really to you today, which is our distress is deep about the potential impact of yet more dredging, carving up sea country, and yet more very limited in our understanding, respectful listening and taking guidance from the Wadawurrung people, of which only 1.5 families of 25 tribes survived colonisation. It's hard for a people who have been so undermined to have the voices and to be able to be an integral part of these kind of proposals. And we think that they have been deeply disrespected in even the proposal that this floating gas terminal go ahead, let alone the impacts on the broader climate emergency, which we've heard about already, and I'm sure you have heard about in other ways. I think that's it from me. I notice that I'm trembling, and that is the depth to which I feel very concerned about this proposal. And I hope that you will respectfully, and I'm sure you're doing your utmost to, know that you're on stolen lands and consider whether this project would have any benefit, because we think it would have none. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I wish you well in the rest of the hearings and everyone concerned.
Thanks, Ms. Grosser. Thanks for your submission.
Thank you.
Okay, we finished a bit early, so we've now got our lunch break, and we'll resume at 2:10 when we'll hear from the North Shore Residents Group. Thanks, everyone. Okay. Next up, we have the North Shore Residents Group. Are you Mr. Norman?
Correct, Chair Carlisle. There's audio coming through here, so I might just get the guys to.
Yeah, no problem.
Excuse me, take a pause.
That's right.
Beautiful.
Okay, now we've got a presentation from you, a PowerPoint presentation. So that's on our screens. We'll hand over to you to start when you're ready.
Great, thank you. It's just loading up. It'll just wait until the spinning stops. Remember I did that last time?
Yeah, just have it.
Right, while this is going in parallel, I might just kick off and start and introduce myself. I'm Garth Norman. I'm here representing the North Shore Residents Group. So I did present back in July 2022.
Yes.
I would like to acknowledge at the start here someone who's very dear to me, who's no longer with us, unfortunately. She passed away about 4 weeks after the presentation back in July. It's Coralie Jenkin. And Coralie was the one who encouraged and requested me to speak up about some of the inadequacies here for the LNG proposal by Viva, and hence why I'm here. I am an employee in the oil and gas industry. I work for a competitor of Viva. The views I express here today are on behalf of myself and of the North Shore Residents Group and are in no way related to my employment in the oil and gas industry. So with that, I might just kind of give you a quick rundown of the North Shore Residents Group, who we are, where we are. We live very close to the shipping channel, as you may recall. A lot of the information is not dissimilar to that we talked about last time, which is around marine safety. And I'm here to talk today about the inadequacies in the marine impact assessment and specifically in addressing items 7 and 8 in the marine impact assessment. And that's due to the inadequacies in the volumes of dredging that will likely be required in the channel to ensure safe navigation of ships through the channel, and also the impacts of that dredging on the marine environment that are not just local to the refinery pier, which is what Viva have assessed in their current EES. So we appear to be having a little bit of issues getting this up and running. I will say, as we're waiting for that minute, that the headlines are that you really cannot separate navigational safety through the Corio Bay shipping channels from the impacts on the marine environment. They are inseparable. And in essence, you need to have done the navigational study, the safety work, to develop the operating parameters for LNG carriers transiting through Corio Bay to understand minimum channel dimensions and properties for safe LNG carrier transit. And they have not been done. And so with that, you cannot talk, or you cannot conclude that the study results are complete until you understand the impact on the bay.
I know that a fair bit of work has gone into that presentation, so we might just see if we can have another go at screen sharing it. Have you tried using just the normal?
Oh, we were up
share
and running
screen?
at 10 to 2.
Oh.
Is any of those, is that one yours?
Yeah, we can do it off the PDF.
Okay, so if you stop sharing.
There we go.
We'll run it slightly differently. Okay. Cover page should be presenting now. Trust that you can see it. What you'll see on the image there on the right-hand side is an image of the channel as you work through Corio Bay. And you'll see in the red square there, that's the extent that Viva have considered in the environmental impact assessment, or the EES. And as you can see, it's a very, very small area to the potential area that will need to be dredged, modified to meet minimum channel dimensions for safe shipping and LNG carriers. I apologise for that. Looks like I've tried to move forward in the presentation and it's gone back to Teams. Boss, where are we at? I just went to scroll and it jumped off. So if I just use the arrows. All right. Got it. All right. Okay, I've attempted to capture most of the items here on this page and in that pre-briefing, but I will say that navigational studies haven't been progressed to the stage that the reasonable assumptions about minimum channel dimensions can be made. A really pertinent example and precedent is what we saw take place in Gladstone in Queensland. And Gladstone has 3 LNG export facilities. Those projects were being developed at or around the same time, I think 2005, 2006. And late in the development, after the approvals for a number of the LNG facilities have been well progressed, if not granted, the requirement for channel dredging came up as a result of looking at the channel dimensions and developing the LNG ship protocols for navigating the Gladstone Bay. And as you can see here, that the costs are very significant for dredging, and the time taken is very significant for dredging. And we're talking in Gladstone, which has a less constrained channel than we do here in Corio Bay. The projects were impacted with about 2 years delay at this late edition of the dredging requirements. The costs of in the order of $1.5 billion were borne by the LNG proponents and the industry. They shared the costs in doing it. And it resulted in about 22 million cubic metres of dredge material being excavated to make that channel safe for harbour. Corio Bay has tighter physical constraints than Gladstone did. And so a safe navigational passage through Corio will likely require dredging quantities in the order of 10 to 100 times greater than Viva has assessed for the marine impacts as part of this EES. And so with that, it's very difficult to accept the conclusions by Viva to items 7 and 8, that there will not be an impact on the Ramsar wetlands and the turbidity and the seagrass growth, because their study is based on a very small localised area and localised impact. This is just a little about us. I'm just going to skip through this. I'm going to trust that there's some recollection from the earlier introduction, but essentially what we're showing is that community of North Shore has been there a long time, predates Viva. The residential area was really growing up and it already started at the time the refinery was being built. One comment I will say about the North Shore Residents Group, we do live in and amongst industry. We are surrounded by industry. We accept that. That's one of the charms of living in North Shore. And we are very supportive of commercial activity, but we're not supportive of developments and activities that pose risks and hazards to the community and the residential area of North Shore. Okay, a little bit more about the dredging. Viva have assumed dredging quantities of 490,000 cubic metres as part of this assessment. There's been no justification or basis provided as to why that is the limit of dredging or what assessments have been done on to date to confirm that the Corio Bay shipping channels are suitable for LNG carriers. The navigational safety aspects of the shipping channels haven't been developed sufficiently. And when I talk about navigational safety, I'll talk about industry guidelines and I'll talk about dynamic modelling. And I see on this page here, there's two listed. There's SIG2, and I introduced SIG2 to the committee back in 2022. And effectively, SIG2 are the industry body globally for LNG tanker transport. So they also cover LPGs. They cover anything effectively that's transported in a gaseous state. And so they are the preeminent industry authority. What they effectively do is provide guidelines and effectively early screening. And so when it comes to channels, SIG2 provide guidance around minimum channel dimensions, being width and depth. And what they provide there is a pretty early screening tool, which would have, could have, should have been used as part of the early site selection for this development. And the way it works is not dissimilar to what you would do in the medical industry, for example, where there'll be some studies, there'll be a collation of information, and then there'll be guidelines, and there'll be some, you know, some error bands and some acceptance, but there'll be firm guidelines, and that's what SIG2 does for the LNG industry. And so when you apply the SIG2 guidelines to Corio Bay, the Corio Bay shipping channel does not meet those. In fact, it falls far, far short. Okay, so what we're not seeing is the work, the technical study, the risk assessment to demonstrate that despite not being able to meet SIG2 guidelines, we can achieve safety because of all these mitigating factors. And so that's what comes out of the PIANC study, the dynamic simulation, and that's where we look at what are the specific risks in the Corio Bay channels based on some dynamic modelling. Not only do those studies and risk assessments look at normal day-to-day transit of LNG carriers, they also consider what are these emergency scenarios or worst case scenarios, or what you do in the event of an emergency. And so Viva quote that there's only 6 hours a day where an LNG carrier can transit the channel due to the depth. And so one of the biggest challenges in there is that incidents can happen at any time. And if we've got LNG carriers that need, or carriers that need emergency egress, there's a very limited window each day with the channel that they can move safely away. And Viva acknowledges that with their 6 hours window for the LNG carrier transit. The Geelong Port in the earlier submissions raised many issues around navigational safety. They flagged that there were gaps in considering channel blockage, elision, tug operations, and emergency departures. And so it's been flagged for a long time. We've now progressed 2.5 years, and it does not appear that Viva have advanced any of those, which are an absolute must for determining the channel dimensions. All right, any questions? I'm happy to take questions through the discussion, by the way, rather than wait to the end. In the EES submission, Viva state that it is possible for an LNG carrier to run aground over the life cycle of the project, yet they've not worked closely with the Port Authority or stakeholders to develop the risk mitigation measures. They haven't developed the protocols for transiting Corio Bay. They haven't determined what the minimum channel dimensions are to ensure navigational safety, and that is your key mitigation. And so you may not make it fully compliant with SIG2, but you may be able to accept less. Port of Gladstone, for example, SIG2 recommends the channel width 5 times the width of the ship, which in this case would be about 250 metres wide. Gladstone did all the work. They assessed that they could accept 200 metres wide, and they did that through the studies. And so that's the type of thing. So if you initially can exceed the criteria, you generally can proceed without concern that you're not going to have a risk in that area. But when you're so far below the criteria and then fail to do the work, either that's a strategic position by Viva or it's ignorant, but it certainly is so far below that industry guideline.
So what sort of, are we talking an order of magnitude below? Like when you say it's so far below the SIG2 guideline,
yep.
Can you give us some numbers around that?
Absolutely. It's further down in the package. It's also presented in the prior IAC, the prior EES submission for North Shore. But for
From
example,
2022 or from the
oh, it's
submission
in
to
both.
the exhibit?
Yeah, I'll cover it. It's 127 metres is what we have at the width in the Hopeton shipping channel, and SIG2 recommends 250 for the LNG carriers. We'll talk through that a little bit more later on.
Okay.
Yeah. And I would conclude that with without having done those risk assessments determining the mitigations, it's a question of when, not if, we have an LNG carrier ground within Corio Bay. And I'll run you through a few reasons why as we go through the package. It was actually the next page, Chair Carlisle.
Okay.
So here are some of the parameters around shipping channels. So this slide is a direct copy of what was presented in 2022. 250 metres versus SIG2, 127 for Hopeton and Corio shipping channels. So we're about half the recommended width by the industry body. The channel depths are 10.8 to 11.9 metres. So in LNG developments, and we'll go through that through the page here, 13 to 13.5 are the recommended depths. The Port of Geelong or the Victorian ports procedures for operating ships in Corio Bay currently do not contemplate any ships in over 280 metres. And so we've got operating procedures and protocols within Corio Bay that haven't yet been developed to confirm that ships of this size can safely come into the bay. Transit through the channel is limited, as we mentioned before, to around 6 hours a day. If there's an incident, event, propulsion failure, something wrong with the ships have nowhere to turn around once they've entered the channel. Once they've commenced that journey, they're stuck in that journey. And whether they can manage that within 6 hours and get the ship back out and turn around is very unlikely, and that's why we need the navigational studies. It may conclude that there may be some additional turning basins, swing basins, parking lots along the channel to enable the ship to turn around at certain points so that you're not stuck into this 30-kilometre journey once they enter the channel. 30 kilometres in, 30 kilometres out.
Is that 30 kilometres measured from where? From the heads or?
From the start of the Point Richards Channel, which is the channel that goes from Port Phillip Bay to Corio to the refinery.
Okay.
And again, in one of the slides, there's the specific distance table from Geelong Port's guidelines, and it's here in this package, so the team can look at that later.
Yeah, can I just clarify on that slide, you're saying the LNGCs will have a 12-metre draft compared to up to 11.9 metres with tide. Is that 12.0 metres or is it 12 metres as in 11.8 or 11.9 rounded to 12?
Yeah, I might answer that question a little bit differently and tell me if it helps.
Yep.
What you see when you look at the navigational charts versus what you see at maintained depth versus what you see as draft, they all relate to each other, but there's a separation between them. And so is it Ports Victoria is the channel, sorry. So, but it's in the Geelong Ports Handbook. So the maintained depth in the channels is 12.2 metres. Okay. Then there's something called underkeel clearance, which is the minimum separation between the ship and the channel bottom that you need. So when you say here, so the 11.9 that I quote for ship draft, that refers to 11, so that's got 300 millimetres or 0.3 of underkeel clearance. For example, in Gladstone, the port LNG procedures mandate a minimum 1.2 metres of underkeel clearance for an LNG carrier. So Corio Bay today to transit an LNG carrier has less than 0.3 of a metre of underkeel clearance. When an LNG carrier transits, when it's in motion, there are funny things that happen. So that, I'm just going to say 0.3 varies as you go along, and it varies with speed and it varies with the shape of the ship. And what happens is there's an effect where as the ship starts moving along faster, that 0.3, it actually gets sucked down closer to the floor. So that's why you have this underkeel clearance minimum to compensate for those sorts of events. So you don't run with such tight margins. So if you have a point 1.2, for example, that ship going into Gladstone, it can suck down as it speeds up through the channel and still not hit the bottom. And that's what our PIANC studies will help us to determine. So they put in parameters of the type of ships that will come in, and they put the specific details of the Corio Bay channel, and they model those, and they determine all those sorts of behaviours with the ships. And so an LNG tanker behaves differently than a container ship, than a cargo ship. Yep. So they're all slightly different, and that's why the modelling is so important, and it takes into account the specifics of the bay. Okay. We talked about emergency egress, and I'll cover that a little bit more as we go along. Now, your question about the depth and the underkeel, does that help?
It does, yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to touch on that a little bit further on this next slide here, which I really pose the question is that what is special about Viva's LNG carriers that they don't comply with what the rest of industry does and with what the rest of Australia does, for example. Now, I could equally pull together and show you the list of all of the LNG developments around the globe with the channel depths and the approach channel depths, and they all say the same thing. None of them say we can operate a terminal with such little draft or in the shipping channel. So let's look at the specifics here for Corio Bay. The top table, the right-hand side, what I've shown here is the key parameters out of SIG2. So that's the governing body, the industry body. That's what the LNG industry says are safe parameters. Navigable depths, i.e. the approach channel, should not be less than 13 metres. Okay, we're 12.2. Channel width should be 5 times the width of the ship. We're not that. The width of the LNG carriers is about 50 metres. So we're far short of that. It says there should be a short approach only in the channels on the inshore route. We have a 30-kilometre approach, or 16 nautical miles. We don't meet that criteria either. Anchorages should be established at the port entrance and inshore to allow a safe spot for ships to park up should there be an incident or should they need to pull away from the terminal. And we don't meet any of those requirements.
I don't want to interrupt you, but you've got about 8 minutes to go, and this detail, that it's not directly relevant to the 4 matters that are before us. So is there anything, can you take us to a part of your presentation that is more directly related to the marine impacts, for instance?
Yes, yeah. And with respect, I do ask you to reconsider that statement because there is a direct relationship to understanding.
Okay, well, perhaps if you could tease that out for us.
Yeah.
Because there are further navigational studies that will need to be done.
Yes.
If the project is to proceed.
Yes.
It's not something we've been asked to look at by the minister, those navigational studies.
Yes.
So if you can just tease that out for us.
I'm attempting to tease out the linkage between the dredging quantities and the extent of assessment. And what I'm attempting to tease out here is that the area for dredging is so much larger than that little pocket that has been considered in the EES. I'm attempting to bridge that link and give you the reasons why the dredging piece is so important and why the factors of an extended dredging campaign should be included into the assessment. So I'll speed it up. Sorry, I take your counsel. We talked about ship grounding. Really quick one here. This is the Esperanza, it's the Hogue Esperanza. This is the actual ship that was under contract to AGL in Western Port Bay for their LNG import terminal. With that project cancelled, this ship was put out on charter. This ship did run aground. So this ship meets all the criteria Viva have told us in their statements. The ships are modern, they've got all the navigational features, they're staffed by qualified crew, they're professionally run. This ship did run aground. It ran aground in 2011. It blocked off a major canal. Since that event, that ship has now been redeployed. It's now one of the FSRUs that has gone to Germany. And so that's what I've shown in the bottom photo here. And you can look at that image there. What's interesting about this, the approach channel in Germany, 20.1 meters depth, right? So they've got that depth, they've got the separation, they've got that big channel. So the assertion that we have all the modern navigational devices and they can prevent us from coming around is simply, you can't rely on that. The channel width here, or the channel depth in this case, was 12 metres where it ran around. So the linkage to dredging, what I've put here is the challenge to Viva's 490,000 cubic metres of dredge quantity. If I've got 3 scenarios here, and this is to estimate the quantities that should, could, and should go into an environmental assessment to determine what the impacts are on Corio Bay. Scenario 1, if we were to deepen the channel but keep the current width, okay, dredging quantities around 5 million cubic metres, that's the 10 times. Scenario 2, if we were to dredge to the 13.5 metres and make it the same width as Gladstone, 200 metres, that's 29 million cubic metres, right? If we were to dredge to the entire SIG2 requirements, that's 50 million cubic metres. So the right answer is somewhere in that band, and that comes down to the risk assessments. And at minimum, the environmental impact assessment should consider the marine impact along the shipping channel to address these sorts of quantities being extracted, because that is the real range that will be dredged to make LNG carrier transit through Corio Bay safe. And bottom right-hand corner, that's the navigation chart that defines the distances. And you'll see the extent. I'll put it at Point Richards Channel. So that is once we enter the, the channel path to Viva Refinery.
It's a bit hard to see there, but that thing you've got circled,
Yes.
is that Point Richard?
Yes, it is.
Yes, okay.
Yes. On the right-hand side, that is, yes.
Yep.
Yep. So let's look at what dredging was for Gladstone. I mentioned the quantities before, 1.5 billion, 22 million cubic metres, and you see that's within the band that we're talking about that it's likely for Corio Bay. It was quoted at 58 weeks. It took 122 weeks for the program. Viva have quoted 8 weeks of dredging, which they can fit within a short window in the spring time frame, which minimises the turbidity and the effects on the marine environment. So it says we can do it at this time because it minimises the spawning impacts and some of the marine life, and we'll do it between September, October, November, somewhere within that window. And what I'm saying is, once you consider the full impact, the full extent of dredging that will be required, that grossly underestimates, and that would push the dredging campaign, as an example, if it's 22 million cubes, it's close to 2 years, could be 1 year to 2 years. And so the marine impact assessment with its narrow 8-week window in a September, October, November timeframe fails to address the impacts on the marine environment throughout the rest of the year when the dredging campaign would continue.
You've got a couple of minutes to go because we
Thank
do
you.
have submitters following you.
Yeah. So in Gladstone, it really was a showcase. It was one of Australia's biggest dredging campaigns. Okay. It went through a full environmental impact statement process. Lots of claims around how we're going to manage this world class, how we're going to meet all of the 600 conditions that were placed on that dredging campaign. It wasn't clean. It wasn't carefree. This page here is just to show that there is a class action that is still ongoing for that dredging campaign that went between 2011 to 2013, and it's still going, and it's in the order of $100 million. So despite all of the controls and best work in environmental assessment, there were still issues. I'm going to skip through this quickly, but this is the escape path, the nearest safe anchorage for an LNG carrier, 30 kilometres. There is nowhere shorter that it can stop. That's why we need the marine and safety studies. And like I flagged before, it may conclude that there are some safer spots that we can create along the route. We can dredge some area. We can dredge 1 million cubic metres at this location to give a safe refuge for an LNG carrier. But that work hasn't been done, and hence we haven't assessed that as part of this environmental assessment. Okay. Again, a modern LNG carrier, a real life example. November last year, Port of Gladstone, LNG carrier, mechanical failure, the ship was not able to move. It was stuck. It was stuck. I had a video. In the interest of time, I won't show you, but it is uploaded into the table of documents, so you can have a quick look at it. But the summary of that
Got 1
video
minute to go.
is that it required 7 tugboats. It was navigating a channel that had been designed suitable for LNG carriers, and that ship had to be moved 12 kilometres offshore to safe anchor to effect repairs due to the fears of what might happen on that tanker with LNG in it so close into port. So they had to move it offshore to effect the repairs. So with dredging, it would be this activity, and I encourage you to take a good look at it. We've got some photos here. This activity would be much more difficult in Corio Bay because of the tight constraints around the channel. And these types of considerations need to go into the channel dredging assessment, which then will flow into the environmental effects.
Now, we've just gone past 2:40 and I know our next submitter is waiting online. So can you wrap up within the next minute or so?
Absolutely, absolutely. So what I table here is that the marine and navigational assessments are absolutely a must to understand the extent of dredging, which then is the must to understand the extent of marine impact, which then is needed for you to conclude that you have negligible effects on the Ramsar wetlands or the grass growths as part of that. What I show here at the back end of the presentation is really there is an alternative LNG terminal, which is going concurrently to the Viva, and this is by Vopak. Vopak site selection, they screened Corio Bay. They determined it not suitable. And this is a company that's been operating for 400 years, operates 4 LNG import terminals around the world. They determined Corio Bay not suitable.
Just to keep it under some control, do you represent Vopak?
No, I do not represent Vopak.
I don't think it's appropriate for someone to say what someone else did or didn't do. Or...
We're out of time in any event. We've got your presentation, so we'll be having regard to that when we prepare our report. And I want to thank you for coming along and presenting to us today.
And sorry, can I just address the response to the gentleman over here, whom I didn't catch his name? No, I do not represent Vopak. And I was clearly pointing out that the Vopak site selection and location does not require any of this dredging, and it avoids all of these marine impacts.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Thanks. Thank you very much for your presentations, Mr. Norman. And if you could stop screen sharing so we can have Dr. Van Hewitt ready to present, that would be great.
Can you hear me?
We can.
I don't use Teams. I'm unaware of how to
Okay, look, the connection is not great, so we're just having a bit of trouble hearing you. Did you have something that you wanted to screen share and you were just saying that you're not sure how to do that? Okay. Did you try and get in touch with Ken from Total Events, who's providing tech support to help you?
I only just logged on.
Okay. If you're not able to screen share, have we got a presentation that's been pre-circulated from 110? No, hang on.
$106.
106. Okay. Okay. We've got someone here who can screen share for you. So if you just give us a minute.
Member Carlisle, I'm not sure how her connection is going to hold up.
Okay.
Just
what might take some of the stress off the connection, Dr. Van Hewitt, is if you turn your video off, and we'll just see if we can hear you a bit better. And we'll screen share from this end. Okay, so if you just let us know when you want us to move through the slides.
Okay, so can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, I'd like to just first of all say I'm representing Surf Riders as Surf Coast. They've made a submission, but it's not what I would have written. I'm just transcribing what they've written as their submission. So I'm coming in this blank and just putting it in. So next slide, please. Is the slide there? There it is. So we've missed one. Sorry. Go forward one. Thank you. So I do agree with everything that's written in there, but I just want to give a background. Surf Rider Foundation is a volunteer environmental group. It's been protecting Australia's coastlands since 1991, but it's an international group as well. And the Surf Coast branch, which is based in Torquay, was formed in 1996. Their motto is respect the beach, and they aim to educate, advocate, and do collective action in a gentle and peaceful way. They're addressing the Viva Energy revised EES because it affects the coastline of Geelong. Surf Riders it encompasses all beaches, not just those that actually have surfing waves. The next slide, please. So part of the submission actually highlighted false and misleading information. The Viva advocate that liquid natural gas, is non-toxic. We've seen multiple news reports about gas toxicity in households. To say it's a non-toxic gas is a bit of a furphy because it actually causes deaths in households that are they don't have the mechanics or good gas facilities. So theoretically, in principle, small amounts of gas do dissipate into the atmosphere, but in practice, gas is actually a very dangerous product while it's used for heating and cooking. So to say that it is non-toxic is actually a misnomer and it's misleading. Next slide, please. The number of residents that could be affected by any sort of accident with the sorry, I'm getting a voice. Can you hear me?
We can hear you okay.
Oh, sorry, I'm getting a voiceover. That's all. I didn't realise I was getting that. So Geelong residents, over 30,000 residents in Geelong could be affected by any accident that is caused through the floating gas terminal and the floating gas facility. So there's two different zones, and I know that Garth before me, Mr. Norman, was actually highlighting these zones, but the number of residents, of people living in the vicinity is quite large, and so the effect of any sort of accident, leakage, explosion, event like that could impact a very large number of people in an adverse way. There's also ancillary industries in the area that could be affected, like the oil refinery, which is there, the chemical import and the fertiliser terminals and the wood chip storage facilities there, among other sorts of industries too. So the impact would be very, very large in terms of population size. Next slide, please. Dredging of the shipping channels. This is very contentious because Viva have actually put a lot of information about the footprint area for the terminal and for the access terminals once they get into Corio Bay, but they haven't actually said that itemised the amount of dredging that will be needed to get those ships into Corio Bay in the first place. And I know that Mr. Norman also went through the channels and the dredging facilities, but they've omitted to put in the information that is required. And I think that not having this stated is more important than what they've actually said, because the emissions mean that they haven't addressed this issue and they haven't actually focused on it. That, in my personal opinion. Next slide, please. Impact on the marine environment. On Thursday, I'm going to be making a presentation on my own behalf that goes into the impacts on the marine environment. The EPA haven't completed their assessment yet on what this would be about. The dredging, I feel that there's real emissions and miscalculations in the technical report A. It takes 16 months for any pollutants to be flushed out of Corio Bay, and that's been done with flume testing and colour testing by Deakin University. So any spillage of any major chemical product is going to take 16 months to be flushed out of the bay into Port Phillip Bay prior to it being actually flushed out through into Bass Strait. And the nominated Ramsar wetlands support endangered significant shorebirds, and there is now an accredited population of orange-bellied parrots in that Ramsar wetlands area, which are critically endangered. So that's the sort of the sort of environmental aspects that need to be taken into consideration that have not been addressed in the supplementary environmental effects statement. Next slide, please. Cultural heritage. I've done a deep dive into this one, and I know that they did do some archaeological work as part of the original EES, and it was field work as well. But they did present with the Wadawurrung elders a desktop study, and one of the quotes was that it is unlikely that there would be any offshore cultural heritage material. I am a scientist. I'm a paleontologist by practice and a geologist. I don't like the idea of unlikely unless you've had a look. I think that the proof in the pudding is actually going in there and having a look. So if they're saying that it's unlikely it's there, go and prove it's unlikely to be there. Go and do a proper research, submarine research there, rather than just state it on a desktop publication. The other thing is with cultural heritage that a lot of the heritage material is oral and it won't be written, and so doing a desktop search for information may not be available unless it's written down. Next one, please. Climate change. In practice, and we're witnessing some horrific things happening worldwide and in Australia too. By bringing in more gas provision, we're actually contributing to climate change in a better way, in a bigger way. We've got these large tankers bringing in methane, which is one of the greenhouse gases. The demand for gas is actually decreasing. There is a lot of news reports that are coming out that we're going to have shortfalls in gas. When you deep dive into that and you have a look at what the reports are, it means that we're going to have no supplies in Australia because we are exporting them. So I know that part of the scope is not to discuss the economics, but this whole project, for what it's going to be, is going to be very limited in the time that it's actually going to be available as a gas provider. Liquid natural gas is not a clean fossil fuel. The Scope 3 emissions are not clearly outlined for this project at all, and in fact, they've very much focused only on the footprint and on the Corio Bay aspects, but not on the longer or the wider term aspects of this project. Is there any more slides? I think that might be the last one.
Slide there about process. We've got a slide about process.
It's on the slide.
It's not up, sorry. There it is. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. So the process actually involves liquid natural gas, turning it into vapour, and treating onshore. Each stage will have fugitive emissions, but these fugitive emissions haven't been itemised for the entire project. The other thing is that in terms of the process, there's going to be a decommissioning at the end of it, and that is still up in the air. There's no tangible decommissioning plan for it. In fact, I can recall the report. It depends on what the government wants and what the alternative uses are. So there is no tangible information about the decommissioning of the whole project. So I think that when you're looking at this project, it's got so many questions about it. I don't think it would be of benefit to the Geelong community. Certainly, the Geelong community doesn't want it. That's been shown in the response by locals. I remember reading somewhere that if one person actually protests, that indicates that 10,000 people support them but aren't able to protest at that time. So Geelong doesn't want this project. There's too many questions about it, and I would encourage the inquiry panel to look very deeply at the problems, not at the positives, but look at what the negatives are and weigh them up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Van Hewitt, for your submissions on behalf of the Surfrider Association. And I think we'll see you again on Thursday, was it?
Thank you, in person, yes.
Okay, we'll see you then. Do we have someone from the Port Phillip Baykeeper Association, either here or online?
That's me, Neil Blake.
Mr. Blake.
That's correct.
We have a presentation. I think it was circulated over lunchtime from you. Let me just find that on my screen. But are you able to share that on your screen?
I'll give it a, oops. I'm not too sure about the sharing process.
Okay. Are you able to do that, Mr. Norman? If we can find it on the screen here, we've got someone here who can assist you, which is very kind of you, Mr. Norman.
Well, that would be wonderful.
Because we only got it over lunchtime.
Bit of community collaboration happening here. I will do my best to go through it fairly quickly as well. So.
As you've only got 10 minutes, did you want to start speaking and we'll get those slides up as soon as we can?
Yeah, that would be good. I guess my concern, I'll just introduce myself. Neil Blake. I've been the Port Phillip Baykeeper for about 14 years now, and also had close involvement with the channel deepening project, which occurred in the about between 2008, around that period. And a lot of what I've got to contribute today relates to that. I'm concerned that there's a limited scope in the technical report, the Chapter 3 for the marine environment, that there hasn't really been any assessment of marine safety risk at Port Phillip Heads, or the other impacts of changes at the heads to allow the liquid gas tankers to come in there with less risk. So that's the key thing that I wanted to bring to the attention of the panel. So yeah, the marine Chapter 3 of the Marine Environment section said that a full assessment was completed of the potential impacts on the marine environment for the project. I just don't believe that's true. And the original marine EES study concluded that construction and operation of the project is unlikely to have adverse impacts on the chemical and physical attributes of the marine environment and the habitat conditions and ecological character of Corio Bay, including Point Wilson, Lime Burners Bay, Port Phillip Bay Western Shoreline, and the Bellarine Peninsula Ramsar site. So that makes no reference whatsoever to the eastern shoreline of Port Phillip Bay or any requirements that might be needed at the heads to reduce maritime risk. So the Great Ship Channel at Port Phillip Heads is 17 metres deep and 245 metres wide. That's taken from the Port Development Strategy discussion paper.
Mr. Blake, it would be helpful if you could just let us know when you want Mr. Norman to change the slides for you.
Oh, so you got that, all right.
Okay.
If we could, yes, so if we can go down to slide number 4, that would be great.
We've got that on the screen now. That's the aerial image of Port Phillip Bay.
That's the one, yep. So that shows, I just wanted to draw attention to the bigger picture that the Port Phillip Heads is the only way you're going to get into Corio Bay. And so this is a really key thing that needs to be taken into consideration. If we can move to the next slide now. It's the only entry. And as I mentioned before, the shipping channel at the heads is 245 metres wide, and that's the key point that needs to be taken into account. The other key thing, though, that needs to be taken into account is that the heads, the entrance is considered hazardous due to the strong currents, the unpredictable waters and active commercial shipping lines. That we move on to the next slide, thanks. So you can see that that's the configuration of the Port Phillip Heads shipping channel. That's come up okay, has it, that slide?
Yes.
So it's a very narrow area that the ships come through there. And it's not only container vessels, but there's a host of other boats, be they recreational sailing boats or whatever, that actually do go through the heads at various times. We'll move on to the next slide now. So there's no margin of width, no margin for error with the channel width. Currently, liquid natural gas carriers are 300 metres long and 43 metres wide with a draft, although I note that there's some contention about that. 50 metres has also been cited as the beam width of these carriers. So the Society of International Gas Tanker and Terminal Operators specify a minimum channel width of 250 metres. So really the existing width of the channel doesn't leave much margin for error. So we can go on to the next one. After the dredging that was conducted at Port Phillip Heads for the channel deepening project in 2007-8, the Port Phillip Eco Centre was fortunate to get tide chart data from the National Tide Centre, and we were able to create this chart showing the pre and post dredging average monthly highest tides. There are four lines on that one. The darker one being for Williamstown, the pink one being at Hovel Pile, which is down near the entrance, and the yellow one was at Lawn. So that's actually outside of, people would understand, outside of the bay, and so it's an interesting comparison. There's also the West Channel Pile too, which is the light blue one, and you can see those tide gauges at the southern part of the bay. There were extreme sort of rises there that would have shown to come to pass as a result of the channel deepening. Now, that's all might be a little bit academic, but if we can move on to the next slide, we can see that there's Hovel Pile had certainly the greatest rise in tide levels of any of the six gauges that we analysed the data for. We can move to the next slide, please. What this meant, though, is that there's ongoing erosion of eastern beaches in Port Phillip Bay. This image here indicates it looks relatively calm waters out to in the distance there, but the swell that's been created down in the Portsea region was quite substantial. We'll move to the next slide, thanks. Portsea Beach in January 2011 required a massive sandbagging exercise to just prevent further erosion of the beach. There was a significant erosion had occurred there. So that's image shows the beach in January 2011. We'll go to the next slide, please. There's ongoing erosion that's sort of also at the eastern end of where the sandbagging was installed. You can see there's significant erosion occurring, and that continues today, as photo taken in September 2024. It looks pretty out of control. So it's the point I'm trying to make, I suppose, in all of this is there's going to be ongoing impacts. It's not just something that with coastal erosion that is going to be a one-off thing and then she'll be right after a while. That erosion will be continuing, providing ongoing cost. We move to the next slide, please.
Mr. Blake, you've only got a minute or so to go because
we're just about there. Point Nepean National Park. So you can see there the marina woodland on the foredune there is collapsing. Infrastructure such as the steps to the beach were no longer connected to the dune, and that was a recently constructed steps. We'll move to the next slide. This is data from the CSIRO showing that there's ongoing shoreline recession at Point Nepean, much faster since the channel deepening had occurred. We move to the next slide. It's another photo just demonstrating the marina woodland being lost. The next slide shows a collapsed midden at Gulls Way in Frankston that occurred in 2011. So it's Indigenous cultural heritage that's at risk. The following slide is another just of what had to be done at Gulls Way. And we can move on perhaps to the last slide. There's further indication of beach renourishment required at Half Moon Bay and also at Alwood. Just indicating the ongoing cost of erosion. So the final summing up is that apart what's at stake is the maritime risk, marine and coastal habitats, destruction of Indigenous cultural sites, diminished amenity of bayside beaches, general community wellbeing because you can't go to the beach anymore, local tradies and economic downturn, and ongoing cost of beach renourishment. So they're just a few of the things that we needed to be highlighted in terms of the entry point to Port Phillip Bay, which is the entry point to Corio Bay.
Okay, so just to be clear, Mr. Blake, your concerns are around the impacts that the dredging for this project will have on the broader Bay beach environment.
Yes. I mean, also concerned about Corio Bay. I mean, where the spoil is going to be taken from any deepening that occurs there will have an impact on Corio Bay too.
Okay. All right. Thank you for your submissions. Thanks for coming along today.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Okay. Do we have Ms. Hurley on the line? Hello.
Yes, I'm here. Hello.
I don't think we've got a presentation from you. You're just going to speak to us today?
That's correct.
So we'll hand it to you when you're ready.
Great, thank you. Do you need me to do a brief intro or should I just jump into it?
Jump straight in.
Fantastic. So hi everyone, thanks for having me. I'm Shannon here from the Victoria National Parks Association. Our concerns are really, because we're a science-based organisation, they are, I guess, in conjunction with marine ecologists. So our concerns are as follows, and I'll just go through them one by one. So the first one is that it is our view that the IAC recommendations on the marine environment have not been met. So the IAC recommendations for further survey work and mapping of the existing marine values were not done. For example, a description of the existing values which are likely to be impacted on was really lacking around the intertidal environment, the littoral zone and the subtidal habitats that could be affected by the project. Our next point is that we believe that there is insufficient baseline monitoring done. So, there is a requirement that we know a lot of baseline info on what existing marine values are already in the survey area and in the surrounding area. And recommendation 1C states that the survey work was to be carried out over a 12-month period to account for all the different environmental influences and differences in that time. But this was not this did not happen. And so we're concerned that there isn't really a strong knowledge of what that baseline monitoring is done to then therefore assess the impacts of the project. Our next point is that there is some poor quality science that has been done. Some of it was a bit sloppy and not convincing or sufficient to predict accurately the impacts on habitats like wastewater and chlorine discharges, especially considering the scale that this project would be. And there really was a lack of detail on the impacts of the existing wastewater discharges from the refinery, for example, the chlorine. Like, for example, the presumption that the chlorine concentration is low, that really is not backed up in our view by some solid methodology. So the next point is, following on from that, is chlorine and other wastewater discharges. We believe that there was insufficient detail around the impacts of these existing wastewater discharges and the methodology. So that's very reiterating what I just said, but just to be clear that the chlorine and wastewater discharges is one of our concerns. Next of all is the impacts on seagrass and a lack of information, surveys and mapping of seagrass, which is relevant to recommendation 1B. So, you know, given the importance of seagrass to the area and generally Port Phillip Bay at large, we feel that the seagrass, particularly in the intertidal zone, was downplayed or ignored, particularly from the impacts of sediment plumes and from dredging and the construction of the project. And we know that seagrasses are quite sensitive to, you know, sediment buildup and changes in the bay. And we know that dredging is one of those things that can really impact seagrass meadows. And we feel that there was really poor quality data collected around the seagrass and the different species of seagrass in the area as well. It's not just sufficient just to say that there's only, you know, one seagrass species and everything that we monitor is going to impact that particular species, all different species the same. There really needs to be some more comprehensive work done on accounting for those different species of seagrass. And then lastly, the impacts of dredging is one of our other concerns. So the monitoring of dredging impacts on seagrass, we believe, wasn't really taken into account, particularly considering the different species of seagrass and over those sediment plumes over a 12-month cycle. And so we believe that further work needs to be done there. So that's all my points that I've got. Feel free to ask any questions if you need any clarification on anything, but I'm probably pretty close to my 5 minutes by now.
Okay, just on that last point, the monitoring of dredging impacts, that's something you're looking at moving forward. If the project was to be approved, you'd like to see more stringent monitoring requirements moving forward once the dredging is actually happening?
Even before I think the dredging happens, we need to be knowing what impact is going to occur on different species of seagrass as well. So I think there needs to be some monitoring done before we even start or think about the dredging.
Okay, so I'm just curious as to what needs to be monitored before the dredging starts. Is it just to gather baseline information about the health and distribution of those seagrass communities?
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
Okay.
knowing what species are where, the mapping that's done, yeah, that needs to account for not just one species, but multiple species.
Okay.
And the response to sediment plumes over a 12-month cycle.
Okay. I think we have a question from Member O'Neill.
Thanks for your submission. Did you get, and don't, I understand these hearings are time intensive and a burden for people to be able to hook into at times when they're trying to work. Just wondering whether you had the opportunity to listen to any of the evidence and cross-examination of the expert witnesses on marine ecology and whether any of that testing gave you any extra comfort in relation to the matters you're raising today.
Yeah, look, I haven't had a thorough chance to listen back, only sort of hearing secondhand from others about how it went. So unfortunately, I can't really comment too much on that at the moment.
That's fine. And certainly don't take it as a pointed comment. It was a genuine question. But thank you for your submission.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Hurley. Thanks for your submissions.
Thanks very much. See you later.
Okay, we'll take our break now and we'll resume at 3:25. So just a 10-minute break. Okay, do we have Ms. Hart on the line?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Hi.
I
Sorry
just
about
can't
that.
see you yet. Have you got your camera switched on?
I am just trying to do that now. How's that? Can you see me now? Maybe not.
No, we've just got a pink square. Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Yep, I can see you. Terrific.
Hi.
Right, we're ready when you are.
Terrific. And yes, thank you so much for this opportunity to have a conversation with you about this Viva's gas terminal. I don't know how much you're aware of the work that Climate does. We basically work in the cultural area. So since 2010, we brought together a broad alliance from across the arts, humanities and sciences to advocate for immediate, effective and creative policy action to restore a climate capable of sustaining all life. So our work has really sought to harness the creative power of the arts to inform, engage and inspire action on the climate crisis, which we see as a reflection of a deep cultural crisis. We see that the fossil fuel industry and its backers have very effectively politicized the issue in order to maintain the entrenched industry interests. One thing I thought would be worth just mentioning is how long we've known about this greenhouse gas emissions, the greenhouse effect 1824, solar energy's capacity, the photovoltaic effect 1839, electric vehicles. The first electric vehicle was driven in the streets of Paris in 1881. 1887 was the first wind turbine to generate electricity. 1940s clean, renewable, algae-based alternative for liquid fuels. We know that there are also like oleaginous bacteria, yeast, fungi. There are, many alternatives to fossil fuels. So, and we know that the industry has known about this problem since the 1960s, that in response, and this is all, we're aware of this because of the disclosure process in civil court cases, that they have really doubled down on the disinformation campaigns and continue to propose projects like the one that we're all here discussing today. They have very deep pockets. They are very capable of hiring, consultants to present their cases, lawyers to challenge the community. We have been watching with great interest the criminal law being increasingly explored as a means, because this is such a serious public safety issue and these industries have had such a deep understanding of the grave threats that their products have presented to the public for a very, very long time, more than half a century. So, in terms of demonstrating neglect, certainly, and efforts to conspire to conceal the dangers, there's phenomenal evidence of that. So I guess in the most respectful way, I do wish to communicate that we really see this as part of an ongoing distraction. It'd be really great if we were talking about some of the alternative regenerative, renewable you know, nature-based liquid fuel alternatives for things that can't easily be electrified, things that can be grown in closed-loop systems, things that provide sustainable jobs to communities that need them most. I think if you asked most people if they would prefer a green fuel to a lethal one, most people would say absolutely. From a consumer point of view, I would really love to be able to travel and not feel hugely guilty. I would love alternatives. Everybody I know is the same. So I guess that's kind of the argument that I want to advance here, is that how people feel about these issues, how this community feels, I think it is an absolute assault on the community. I think it's an assault on all of our time and energy that we're still needing to confront lethal energy projects like this. And I really very much appreciate the opportunity to communicate how we feel about it. That's what the arts is all about, you know, how we feel about this and how we connect our emotions and apply them according to our values. So yeah, that's really all I think I'd like to say, and I'm more than happy to take any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hart. Thanks for coming along, and thanks for making your submission to us today.
Terrific. Thanks again.
Okay, do we have someone here from the Australian Manufacturing Workers Union? I'm not sure that we had. Did we know who was going to be presenting, Sarah, for the AMWU? Mr. Hines, are you online? Okay, we'll go to our next submitter then. Is Mr. Spear on the line? Ah, there you are. Now, I think you're presenting both personally and then for Geelong Sustainability. Okay. Okay, we're ready when you are.
Great, all right. Well, good afternoon, members of the panel. My name is David Spear. I'm a Geelong resident and a father of 2 teenage children, my son 17 and my daughter 15. I'm here to voice our strong opposition to the proposed Viva Energy liquid natural gas import terminal. This isn't just a project. It's about the future of our home, our community, and the environment that my children and their generation will inherit. It's personal for us, and I want to share not only my perspectives, but some of their heartfelt concerns too. My daughter has so eloquently wrote, "We're constantly told in school how important it is to protect our planet, but this proposal would lock Geelong into relying on fossil fuels when we should know, when we know we should be moving towards renewable energy." She's right. This project, with its 600,000 tonnes of annual carbon pollution, is a step backwards when we should be leading the way towards cleaner, smarter solutions. How can we talk to our children about climate action when approving projects like this that so clearly undermine that goal? The proposed terminal is alarmingly close to where tens of thousands of people live, work and study. My son put it perfectly when he said, "It's hard to feel like our safety is being taken seriously when Viva Energy hasn't even done a full safety and navigation risk assessment." As a parent, it's devastating to see my children worry about their safety and feel unheard when they express legitimate concerns about risks that could impact their lives directly. Corio Bay is central to our lives. It's where my family spends time together, enjoying the simple joys of swimming, boating and relaxing. My children cherish these moments, but they now are filled with fear about what could happen with this special place. My daughter wrote, Corio Bay is where we go to relax and spend time with my family and friends. But if this project goes ahead, we'll lose access to large parts of the bay because of exclusion zones, and I'll always worry that something bad might happen. This project risks taking away not just physical access to the bay, but the peace of mind and joy it brings to all of us who live here. From an environmental impact perspective, this project is unconscionable. From the dredging of the bay to the discharging of harmful chlorine into the water, the damage to Corio Bay's fragile marine ecosystem could be irreversible. As my son said, dredging for LNG tankers and pumping chlorine into the bay could do long-term damage to the water, the wildlife, and the natural balance. That's not something you can reverse once it happens. In addition, we remain deeply concerned about the lack of transparency regarding the potential impact on Aboriginal cultural heritage. This land has profound significance to its traditional owners. And my daughter said, if we don't respect our history, what kind of future are we building? My children's words stay with me when we talk about this project, and I hope that they resonate with you too. My daughter wrote, I'm only 15, but I think about the future a lot. My friends and I want to grow up in a world where we're not constantly worried about climate disasters, pollution, or losing our natural spaces. My son added, this project feels like a step in the wrong direction. We deserve a chance to live in a world that puts the planet and people first. I couldn't have said it better myself. The Viva Energy proposal doesn't reflect the future we want for Geelong, one that values sustainability, safety, and community well-being over short-term profits. Let's also note the precautionary principle from a legislative imperative. The project also fails the precautionary principle, which is a cornerstone of environmental decision-making. The principle mandates that where there are risks of serious or irreversible harm, precaution must be exercised, even if some uncertainties remain. The risks proposed by this project, environmental degradation, safety concerns, and fossil fuel dependency, are precisely the kinds of threats the precautionary principle is designed to address. As my children have both highlighted, these risks jeopardise the future that they will inherit. Moving forward with this project would violate the principle and fail the generations who will live with the consequences. So in conclusion, members of the panel, I urge you to consider the voice of our community, especially those of our young people. Approving this project would lock Geelong into fossil fuel reliance, endanger our environment, and burden future generations with the consequences of today's poor decisions. The precautionary principle demands that we act with caution in the face of such significant risks. Rejecting this proposal is not only the right choice, but the responsible one. As my daughter said, my friends and I want to grow up in a world where we're not constantly worried about climate disasters, pollution, or losing our natural spaces. Instead of this terminal, let's support developments that align with our community's values, projects that prioritise sustainability, safety and innovation. Together, we can ensure Geelong's future is one defined by bold, responsible decisions that honour both the present and the generations to come. Thank you for your time and for listening to my presentation.
Thank you for coming to present to us, and can you pass our thanks on to your children as well for the input into that submission? Okay, now you're also presenting on behalf of Geelong Sustainability, and we have a PowerPoint presentation that you have prepared and provided to us. So if you want to screen share that and take us through it.
I might need Ken, that's not the correct presentation. I clicked on the wrong window. What number is this?
It's document number 98.
Looks like it. Right, thanks very much. Okay, so thank you for the opportunity to make a submission on behalf of Geelong Sustainability to the Viva Energy Gas Terminal Project Supplementary Environmental Effects Statement Inquiry and Advisory Committee. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the Wadawurrung people, the traditional owners of the land, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and to all First Nations people here today. We recognise their stewardship and continuing connection to land, waters and environment, and we support their healthy country plan, Let's Make Country Good Together. We also note that this project is on Wadawurrung country and will impact sea country. So who is Geelong Sustainability? Geelong Sustainability is a not-for-profit community organisation and registered charity that supports residents of Geelong and surrounding regions to be more sustainable in their everyday lives. Since our inception in 2007, Geelong Sustainability has become a region's leading sustainability group with extensive networks in community, government and business throughout Geelong and the Barwon region. We are recognised for our evidence-based innovative projects which educate and support communities' transition to net zero and circular economy. Since our inception, we have delivered grant projects totalling $1.4 million and facilitated $9.3 million of renewable energy investment in the community, which has helped to mitigate over 120,000 tonnes of cumulative CO2 emissions. Our community's opposition to the proposed Viva Energy Gas Import Terminal project is steadfast and resolute. Over 2,000 submissions for the original EES and almost 400 submissions for the supplementary EES were made against Viva's project, including voices from Geelong Grammar School, North Shore Residents Association, environment groups, school students, fishing enthusiasts, and many other community organisations and individuals. We represent a considerable amount of people and have incredibly strong relationships and partners across various sectors of the community. We have 240 financial members, over 50 highly active volunteers, and a broader supporter base of 20,000 newsletters and social media subscribers in our region actively engaged with our work. Our discussion today draws on our understanding of the key issues and community concerns. Here's an overview of our concerns. This project must not be approved. It is deeply flawed and very concerning in its impact to the environment, local community and climate. The gas and climate implications of this project, coupled with insufficient work on alternatives, render Viva's proposal unacceptable. The supplementary EES statements have not allayed our concerns. If anything, they've amplified them. Key shortcomings in Viva's supplementary EES must be acknowledged. We have an array of concerns about this project detailed in our submission. Some of our main concerns, which we'll cover today, include 1, impacts of marine ecology and inadequate marine studies, review findings and unreviewed challenges, failure to provide cultural values assessments, dredging concerns, air quality concerns, safety concerns, and climate change impacts. There are several key shortcomings in Viva's supplementary EES that clearly make this project untenable and do not address the Minister's directions, including inadequate marine studies, peer review findings and unresolved concerns, failure to provide cultural values assessments. Let's start with marine ecology. Our bay is the centre point of the region. It holds important ecosystems within it, and we have a responsibility to protect the marine environment and everything it supports within our community and for the local ecosystems. Not only do we have a pristine marine environment, but also incredibly unique and internationally recognised Ramsar wetlands. This project threatens the marine ecology with its current dredging identified through the EES, as well as potential additional dredging concerns and associated impacts we will explore later in this presentation. Inadequate marine studies. The current environmental effects statement and supplementary studies conducted by Viva Energy fall short in several critical areas, including baseline monitoring, detailed assessment of chlorine plumes, and the impact on seagrasses. The baseline monitoring conducted has been insufficient as the marine surveys have not been carried out over a full annual cycle, failing to account for the life cycle and seasonal variability of different species. This incomplete data collection undermines the reliability of the environmental impact assessments. Additionally, the studies provide inadequate details and on the extent and concentration of chlorine plumes resulting from the refinery's discharges, making it difficult to assess the true environmental impacts on marine life and water quality. Chlorine and its byproducts can be harmful to marine ecosystems, and without detailed plume data, the potential risks to the marine environment remain unclear. Seagrasses. Seagrasses play a crucial role in nutrient cycling, particularly nitrogen sourced from microbes associated with seagrass roots. The monitoring of dredging impacts on seagrass has not been done adequately. The insufficient assessment of dredging impacts on seagrass, especially considering that seagrass leaves tend to stay within the bay even when detached by storms and grazing birds, raises significant concerns. Furthermore, the scientific studies presented are highly subjective and do not adequately show existing environmental values and impacts. The field surveys were either poorly designed or insufficient in number, leading to an inaccurate representation of baseline knowledge and consequently environmental impact. Given the critical role of seagrasses in the bay's ecology, accurate measurement is essential. The distribution of seagrasses has not been adequately mapped, and some analysis use a generic seagrass category rather than identifying individual species, which biases the outcomes and fails to capture the specific ecological dynamics of Corio Bay. The environmental conditions in Corio Bay differ significantly from broader Port Phillip Bay, and these differences have not been adequately accounted for in the studies. The areas impacted by the project face east and are sheltered from prevailing winds and waves, whereas the reference sites face southwest and are exposed, leading to potentially skewed results. In conclusion, supplementary marine studies conducted by Viva Energy are insufficient in several critical areas. Comprehensive year-round monitoring and more detailed objective scientific assessments are necessary to accurately understand and mitigate the environmental impacts on Corio Bay. Peer review findings and unreviewed changes. We are highly concerned with Viva Energy's studies throughout the supplementary EES process, specifically the Technical Report A Supplementary Marine Environment Impact Assessment. Despite the multiple rounds of peer reviewers' feedback, Viva Energy did not take into account Stantec's highlighted concerns and did not appropriately respond to address them. The Technical Report A that was submitted for the supplementary EES was not peer reviewed in its entirety, representing a failure by Viva to follow processes in accordance with the Minister's Direction 2E, peer review of model calibration. The original peer review conducted by Stantec of Viva Energy's Marine Environment Studies, Attachment 1 Peer Review Report B, identified several unaddressed gaps and key issues, including the need to improve resolution in the hydrodynamic models, rerunning discharge and sediment transport models, and additional investigations into the effects of chlorination byproducts on marine ecosystems. It also called for further assessments on the impact of dredging on seagrass. Viva Energy then provided a final technical report that had effectively not undergone a completed peer review. This report still contained numerous shortcomings and concerns which have been detailed in Stantec's letter on the 20th of November. Some of the key concerns and limitations include issues in aquatic ecology and that there remain shortcomings with respect to bioaccumulations of chlorine uptake in oysters, 1A of Stantec's letter. There remains inadequacy in Viva Energy's statistical analysis on monitoring data as highlighted in 1B of Stantec's letter. The comparison of hydrodynamic predictions and measurements are not sufficient as highlighted in 1C in Stantec's letter, including the failure to follow industry best practice in the use of hydrodynamic models using 3D currents. This has not been undertaken. Section 1E of the Stantec letter states that they do not believe information presented in the technical report exhibited version adequately demonstrates the adequacy of the model. In terms of aquatic ecology, the project does not establish a suitable baseline for monitoring due to its flaws in sampling design and data analysis. When asked if the concerns have been addressed to Stantec's satisfaction, Stantec has provided numerous reasons that the items have not been addressed to their satisfaction. This is surely a failing of the peer review process. Air quality concerns. Another concern within the EES is air quality and the additional pollution this project creates. There is no safe threshold for air pollution exposure, a fact supported by numerous epidemiological studies. Even low levels of air pollutants can have significant health impacts, particularly on vulnerable populations such as children, the elderly, and those with pre-existing health conditions. This is a critical concern in the context of the proposal Viva Energy Gas Import Terminal, which could contribute to various forms of air pollution. Volatile organic compounds, or VOCs. We're particularly concerned about the emission of volatile organic compounds from the terminal. VOCs can react with other pollutants in the atmosphere to form secondary air pollutants, such as ground level ozone and particulate matter, which are harmful to human health. The formation of these secondary pollutants can exacerbate respiratory and cardiovascular diseases and contribute to premature mortality. Inadequate air monitoring, air quality monitoring. The current air quality monitoring station is located in South Geelong, which may not accurately capture the variations in air quality around North Shore. This is problematic because air pollution levels can vary significantly over short distance, especially in areas close to industrial activities. Without accurate and localised air quality monitoring, it is difficult to assess the true impact of the terminal on the surrounding community. This project will also add to the existing noise pollution in the local area, which already at times exceeds the limit, creating ongoing noise issues for local residents. In summary, air and noise pollution risk proposed by this project, and the fact that there is no safe threshold for air pollution exposure, this project must not be allowed to proceed. The potential for greenhouse gas emissions, methane leakage, the VOCs and VOCs demands thorough assessment and mitigation. Enhanced air quality monitoring is essential to accurately reflect conditions in North Shore and other affected areas. The health and wellbeing of the community hinges on a comprehensive and precautionary approach to managing air pollution from this project. Our community's safety and health must come first, and as such, this project should be unequivocally rejected. I need to provide cultural values assessment. The proposed Viva Energy Gas Import Terminal project has failed to comply with the Minister for Planning's directions regarding the cultural values assessment, specifically recommendation 12 of the Minister's direction. This failure is significant and undermines the project's ability to proceed without a thorough understanding of the potential impacts on Aboriginal cultural heritage. The following points outline the key issues and argue the project cannot be approved due to this non-compliance. The cultural values that may be impacted by the project are still unknown. This lack of information poses a significant risk to Aboriginal cultural heritage. The potential for unknown values to be affected means that the project's impacts cannot be fully assessed or mitigated. This uncertainty is unacceptable and highlights the need for a completed CVA before any approval can be granted. Additional dredging concerns. Further, there's been no meaningful engagement with Ports Victoria regarding security and exclusion zones. Noting the additional concerns that have been tabled to the IAC yesterday by Ports Victoria, and also the presentation this afternoon by Garth Norman on this issue around dredging as well. The proposed Viva Energy Gas Import Terminal in Corio Bay most likely requires significantly more dredging than initially outlined in Viva Energy's EES and supplementary EES documents. And it is unable to assess the impact of the project without taking these further impacts into consideration. Typical LNG tankers are approximately 300 metres long, 43 metres wide, and have a draft of 12 metres. The current depth of the Geelong Channel is 11.9 metres with the tide and 10.6 metres without, which is insufficient for these large vessels. This discrepancy indicates that extensive dredging is needed to ensure safe passage and berthing of LNG tankers. Without proper navigational risk assessments and stakeholder confirmation that LNG carriers can safely visit Corio Bay, industry standard channel dimensions must be assumed. Therefore, Corio Bay channels need significant dredging to reach at least 13 metres in depth and potentially up to 250 metres in width. This extensive dredging over a 30-kilometre transit involves many millions of cubic metres lasting many months, far more than Viva's proposed 490,000 cubic metres over 8 weeks. The scale of dredging required could be much larger than estimated and may be in the order of 10 to 100 times greater. A rival LNG company previously rejected Corio Bay as a location for a gas import terminal due to concerns about significant dredging requirements and the associated marine impacts. Given the dimensions of a typical LNG tanker, the channel would need to be deepened and possibly widened to accommodate these vessels. This extensive dredging could have significant environmental impacts, including marine habitat disruption, increased destruction and disruption, increased turbidity, and potential contamination for distributed sediments. The extensive dredging required for the LNG terminal could have a far-reaching environmental and community impacts. Dredging can destroy and significantly alter marine habitat, affecting biodiversity and the health of the marine ecosystem. Increased turbidity and the release of contaminants from distributed sediments can degrade water quality, impacting marine life and potential human health. Dredging operations generate significant noise and vibration, which can disturb marine life and nearby communities. The local community, particularly in North Shore, has expressed concerns about the safety and environmental impacts of the project, increased ship traffic and associated further risks exacerbating these concerns. We've seen the adverse effects of additional projects like this with the example in Gladstone, where they have had to do additional dredging with considerable adverse effects for the region ongoing. Any additional dredging would invalidate Viva's EES and supplementary EES, as the true environmental effects have not been adequately modelled. The potential impacts on the marine ecosystem, water quality and local marine life are significant. We wish for the IAC to enact a mechanism that would ensure that any further dredging beyond what is currently proposed must go through an additional supplementary EES process. Emergency egress and anchorage issues. The combination of narrow channel width and varying depths leaves minimal room for emergency manoeuvres of safe navigation, especially during low tide, which increases the risk of grounding or other navigational hazards. In the event of an emergency, the only path for the LNG carrier to safe anchorage are via the Corio and Hopeton channels, which are narrow and shallow. The nearest safe anchorage is 30 kilometres away at Point Richard, requiring stricken vessels to pass within 220 metres of North Shore homes. This lack of adequate emergency egress and anchorage options poses significant risks. And here are some additional concerns to be noted. Safety is a major concern for the proposed Viva Energy Gas Import Terminal, given its proximity to residential areas and schools. The LNG carriers will transit our busy tourist-focused bay, coming dangerously close to recreational fishers and boaters. Any incident involving these vessels would pose significant risk to public safety. Proximity to residential areas. The LNG import terminal is alarmingly close to North Shore residential areas, with shipping routes for LNG tankers passing within 220 metres of homes. Sandia International Laboratory findings. The findings of Sandia National Laboratories, which conducted comprehensive safety and hazard assessments of LNG transport, highlighted the potential for severe public safety hazards from thermal radiation and flammable vapour clouds, with hazard zones extending up to 3,500 metres from the spill site. Viva Energy has not adequately addressed these findings in their risk assessment. Complexity and safety of port operations. The introduction of LNG carriers to Corio Bay, which is already experiencing increased ship traffic due to various port expansion projects, significantly raises the complexity and safety risk of port operations. LNG carriers are much larger than any ships currently entering Corio Bay, and their draft requirements can only be met at high tide, adding to the operational challenges. Compounding risks. overlay of refinery and LNG hazard zones in Corio Bay. The overlay of hazard zones from the proposed LNG import terminal and the existing refinery in Corio Bay raises significant safety concerns. Both facilities have their own distinct risk profiles, but when their hazard zones overlap, the potential for catastrophic consequences increases dramatically. Impact on recreational activities. The expansion of maritime exclusion zones around the refinery jetty will double the area, impacting access to Corio Bay for fishing and boating, which are important recreational activities for the local community. The lack of clear markings for these exclusion zones further increases the risk to recreational users. And of course, the visual impact. This project would not only mar the natural beauty of our bay, but also threaten Geelong's appeal as a tourism destination. This project would result in the continuous movement of enormous gas tanking ships through our bay. Local businesses, many of which rely on the stunning waterfront views, would be adversely impacted by the constant presence of these massive vessels. Now, climate change and climate change impact concerns. We're amidst a climate emergency. We need to be investing in renewable energy and electrification instead of investing in more fossil fuel infrastructure. The emissions cited by Viva for 160 petajoules of gas delivered via the terminal would equate to 12% of Victoria's 2022 emissions and 34% of our targets for 2035. The burning of gas at the terminal will result in the emission of greenhouse gases contributing to climate change. Additionally, there is a risk of methane leakage, which is a potent greenhouse gas with a global warming potential many times greater than carbon dioxide. Methane leakage can occur during the extraction, transportation, and processing of natural gas, and even small leaks can have significant environmental impacts. The IAC's 2022 integrated assessment acknowledges that the majority of submissions received in 2022 were opposed to the terminal, with most referencing climate impacts, including emissions from the use of imported gas. The project's threat to Victoria's climate change target requires a proactive and realistic assessment, rather than the appeal to technicalities of the EES process. Given the urgency of a meaningful climate response, it's important to consider the project's climate impact in real terms, including but not limited to its impact on jurisdictional targets. The concerns in our submission raise, in conclusion, the concerns in our submission raise significant risks associated with the proposed Viva Energy gas import terminal. These points emphasise the need for a reassessment of the project's safety, environmental impact, and suitability of the proposed location. The supplementary EES statements have failed to alleviate our concerns, highlighting key shortcomings such as poorly conducted marine studies, unaddressed cultural heritage impacts, and inadequate safety, navigation and security measures. The project's extensive dredging requirements and insufficient engagement with key stakeholders further exacerbate these issues. This submission clearly demonstrates the numerous and clear reasons that the proposed Viva Energy gas import terminal must be rejected by the IAC and the Planning Minister. Marine impacts in inadequate marine studies. The current studies lack a comprehensive year-round monitoring, detailed chlorine plume data, and accurate seagrass impact assessments, undermining their abilities and failing to mitigate, undermining their reliability and failing to mitigate environmental impacts in Corio Bay. 2, air quality concerns. The project poses significant air pollution risks, including greenhouse gas emissions, methane leakage, and VOCs, which can harm vulnerable populations. Inadequate local air quality monitoring further exacerbate these concerns. 3, peer review findings and unreviewed changes. Numerous gaps identified in the peer review of Viva Energy's marine studies, including the need for improved hydrodynamic modelling and seagrass mapping and thorough chlorine discharge assessments, have not been resolved. Failure to provide cultural assessments, cultural values assessments. Number 4, non-compliance with the Minister for Planning's direction regarding the cultural values assessments makes it impossible to proceed without a thorough understanding of potential impacts on Aboriginal cultural heritage. 5, dredging concerns. Significantly more dredging than outlined is needed, leading to substantial environmental and community risks with inadequate monitoring and mitigation measures, making this project untenable. 6, climate change impacts. The project threatens Victoria's climate change targets by increasing greenhouse gas emissions and fugitive methane leaks, likely underestimated, which makes it an obstacle to meaningful climate action. In summary, it is imperative that this project is halted permanently. Our community has voiced its opposition clearly and repeatedly. We call upon the IAC to advise the Minister for Planning to protect our environment, our safety and our bay by rejecting this flawed proposal once and for all. Thank you for your consideration and listening to our submission.
Thanks, Mr. Spear. You obviously had some very detailed speaking notes there. We've got your original submission, but it would be helpful if you're happy to provide them, for you to provide a copy of your speaking notes to the IAC as well. Look, you have raised some issues that are outside our remit, so we won't be able to make findings and recommendations about those issues. But you've also raised some issues that are within our remit, so those notes would be helpful, and we just want to thank you for the time put into that submission.
No problem. Thank you.
Any questions?
Just a couple of quick ones. So I was able to follow 90% of what you said based on your 22-page submission back in October. The bits of that submission that weren't highlighted today, you still seek to rely upon those matters that were in the original 22nd or 24 October submission?
Yes.
Secondly, was a question that I asked a previous submitter. Have you had the opportunity to review or listen into any of the cross-examination expert evidence that occurred pre-Christmas or submissions that were advanced post-Christmas this year? And have any of those matters that were discussed and raised before us led to any changes to the content of your submission based on your 24 October document?
The short answer is no, but let me expand by saying we're small volunteer organisations with full-time
Certainly not a cruise.
No resources.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Certainly
so
not a
through
cruise.
lack of wanting to. It's more about capacity, and I think the panel should keep that in mind. Yep.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. Thanks for your efforts.
Thanks, Mr. Spear.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
We'll just do a final call out if there's anyone from the Australian Manufacturing Workers Union online. Nope. Okay, we'll bring proceedings to a close for today.
Can I just raise one matter?
Yes.
So I come back to this request that we understand better. Is that louder? The request was for that mapping update for the plots. We know now it was not a Mr. Wallace role. That mapping is prepared by Dr. Yates. Dr. Yates on leave. We know he'll be back on Monday. What we're going to ask, we know I've got to run this model to prepare them, but is it all right with you if we ask Dr. Yates, give him a couple of days to do it, but to undertake to have that filed with you by, say, Friday of the next week as a document that's given the time to prepare it? If that's all right with you, we'll just do it in reverse. We'll say it's got to be done by on or before. It could be earlier, but we can do then and then we'll just file it if that's okay.
Yes. I mean, look, the earlier the better, but if he's on leave, he's on leave.
Yeah. We'll say as soon as possible, but I thought we needed some window as well.
Yes.
And obviously, if you can do it overnight, would be good news, but I didn't want to falsely represent that we could.
Yep. Nope, that sounds good. Okay, we'll see everyone at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Thank you.